This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
Hello, one and all, to the 6th episode of ThROH The Years, the podcast where the two gentlest gentlemen review Ring of Honor show by show from the beginning. And this gentleman number one is Trevor Dame. And as always, by my side is the gentlest of the gentle gentlemen, Matt Feuerstein. Matt, how you doing?
So am I the gentlest of the gentle gentlemen, or am I gentleman number two, or do I have both titles?
Well, see, you're both, because gentleman number two lets gentleman number one go first, because he's even more of a gentleman.
You know, you finally nailed me.
Oh, I've been dreaming about that.
Well, you are alone. Which is actually sort of just a statement about how we are in the universe. We're alone. We're
so alone.
Floating in a black chasm of darkness. Anyway, welcome to ThROH The Years.
But Matt, we're not actually alone, because after our first episode on Place to Be Nation, we've gotten, as we have after every episode, a lot of lovely comments, and I'd like to thank everybody that hopped on board. I'd like to thank everybody that's been on board since the start. And I think the first thing, and as we should thank Place to Be Nation yet again, and thanks Cubs for he really went out of his way with posting messages on his site and on Twitter, letting people know stuff he didn't have to do, that we had moved. So I just want to thank him one more time for being so incredibly gracious.
He was just so excited to get rid of us. That's my theory. So
it was like we finally moved out. You know, he had been leaving all those hints on our bed, like how to find a job. He just wrote on the cover of another book and left it on our bed. But
we still haven't. This is not a paid position.
Nope, and it never will be. We're keeping it pure. But I like that.
In spirit of the pure wrestling title.
In spirit of the pure wrestling title, we'll get going right near the end. Yes. But I'd like to just thank Place to Be Nation and Sieg. That was my horrible Sieg into the plug for Place to Be Nation, where every episode I was thinking, starting with last episode, we try plugging a new, different podcast on Place to Be Nation, because just to show how many good ones there are, and to justify my listening of so many of them,
and to kiss some ass,
court-mandated kissing of ass. But I can tell you specifically this episode, a podcast I really enjoy on Place to Be Nation that I think if you like this show, you'll probably have a pretty good chance of liking, is Where the Big Boys Play, because that is basically this show done better, done about WCW. They review every supercard, you know, every Clash, every pay-per-view from the beginning, Chad and Parv. And the episode I would specifically like to recommend is episode 77 of Where the Big Boys Play, because that is the Beach Blast 92 episode. And not only are you getting a really good show that they review with Sting and Cactus Jack, and just a really good card overall, the half-an-hour Rick Rude, Ricky Steamboat Iron Man match, but they also go over Bill Watts's 10 Commandments that he kind of placed in when he became Booker of WCW in the early 90s. And it's just a really interesting kind of revisiting of those rules with a bunch of hindsight, and it's a good show for review, and it's a good show for history, and you get a slice of both. So if you're going to listen to one podcast from Place to Be Nation this week, it better be us, because you're already here. You'll have no gods before us, no pods before us. But if you're going to listen to two, check out episode 77 of Where the Big Boys Play.
Hear, hear.
And now that will take us to the 6th show in Ring of Honor history, and that is Honor Invades Boston, which took place on August 24th, 2002, at the Americal Civic Center in Wakefield, Massachusetts. A quick Google Map search showed me that, in fact, Wakefield is about 40 minutes from Boston. It drew Ring of Honor's biggest crowd so far of 500 people, which is probably 25-50 more than they had done in their largest Murphy Rec Center in Philly shows. This is, again, the very first show Ring of Honor ever did outside of the Murphy Rec Center, outside of Philly. And it went really well from the attendance standpoint. In fact, going to the Observer at the time, he said Dave Meltzer says the show went 3.5 hours. He said it was a successful debut. They opened with a history of pro wrestling in Boston speech, talking about big moments in history, and specifically did not mention WrestleMania 14. So
did he mention who gave the speech?
No, he didn't actually, and the speech is not on the tape. So that's something obviously they edited for time, or maybe that was just for the live audience. But it must have been the show as a whole a success, because Dave mentions, with the success in a new market, the company right now has a goal of running one show per month in Philadelphia and one show per month in the Boston area, as well as expanding into new markets. They are running both September 21st and October 5th in Philadelphia as an experiment to see if they can pull it off. Ring of Honor is basically budgeted to where they need 400 to 500 fans as a break-even on house shows, but their profits are made by selling videos. The deal is, for them to get any serious video business, the shows have to be very good to great, as people won't buy average or even good videos. So it's interesting that obviously Dave was getting word about this, because Ring of Honor did not, in fact, run Boston once a month. It would become, the Massachusetts area would become a regular stop, but it would be more of a every 3 months-ish kind of stop.
Yeah, up until maybe like 2 years into the company, Boston was probably their their second most frequented place, other than Philly, I would say. And then I think probably like New York, New Jersey area kind of usurped it.
But that's the thing. Maybe part of that was also, I noticed they moved around a lot in Massachusetts. They couldn't quite find a stable home the way the Murphy Rec Center would be their home in Philly for quite a while. They'd have one more show in Wakefield, and then they'd kind of bounce around Massachusetts a little bit, so maybe that added to it. And obviously Ring of Honor would start to expand in the next year, trying out different cities, but they never, for whatever reason, did the once a month that apparently they gave the impression that they would here. But one other thing about this show that I found really interesting is the idea that Ring of Honor was actually scared of this crowd going in. Dave writes in The Observer, those in the company felt this was the best wrestling, and he writes wrestling in quotes, crowd they performed in front of. They were surprised because Revere, which is the same market, was famous as a bloodthirsty crowd for ECW, where great matches didn't always get over. They did a barbed wire board match on this show, which they wouldn't do in Philadelphia. Because of that, but the board match didn't really get over. So I think it's interesting that they had that kind of mindset, because this crowd is actually, from watching the show, just a good crowd, and maybe better than the Philly crowds in terms of reaction, not by a ton. But it's also interesting that Dave said they wouldn't do barbed wire in Philly, because literally the last show we watched had a match with copious use of barbed wire.
No, they wouldn't do barbed wire boards in Philly.
Oh,
right? The barbed wire
boards
is okay,
makes all the difference.
Yeah, you can't have a board in Pennsylvania.
It's the contrast.
They already have an athletic commission. You can't also have a board and a commission. That's too many groups of men. So an interesting thing I was thinking about with this show is the context of the month that it took place in, because it took place in August of 2002, and the mission statement of ROH was that it was pure wrestling, wasn't sports entertainment crap. They were going back to basics. And I think a lot of people listening probably remember the WWE in August 2002. It was a month that was notable for its pure sports build to the SummerSlam 2002 main event, which was The Rock against Brock Lesnar, and that was the day after this show, actually, and took place in Long Island. And that was a month where WWE was probably as back to basics in terms of like just heated, serious wrestling booking than at any other point in the past couple of decades. And SummerSlam 2002 was a fairly no-frills wrestling show that got really great reviews. So it's interesting just to see that ROH is sort of trying to be this thing that really doesn't stand in such contrast to what WWE was doing on this particular month. Now, of course, a few weeks later, Raw and SmackDown would go in separate directions, and Raw started doing Katie Vick related stuff and HLA. But
And Billy and Chuck wedding and
right, exactly.
ripping off the Christopher Street connection, of course.
Right, of course. But the SmackDown remained fairly wrestling centric, and possibly you could argue having a better wrestling than ROH did at the time. WWE's roster was actually pretty insanely loaded with like top tier wrestling talent. But so ROH kind of had to stand not on its philosophy, but on just the quality of the matches they were putting out. And I think you saw kind of the ups and downs of that on the show tonight. This is a really, really packed show as far as number of matches. And you mentioned this being a good crowd, and they were. But there were a lot of matches on the show, and I could sense burnout a few times over the course of the show.
Yeah, I definitely in the main event, this might have been one of the first times where they really liked the main event, but you could tell a couple of lulls where it was just maybe they were getting a little exhausted just from having seen so many segments. This felt like the most packed, I mean, we can get to it more later, but the most packed kind of, in terms of just, things happening in the ring. So many segments, so many impromptu things.
And unlike Road to the Title, it wasn't like the same guys coming back. It was just like they just booked everybody on this show, basically.
And for talking about the real sports thing, how WWE was kind of going a little more to that for this brief period, I just am reminded of how many times during these first few shows that Steve Corino would just do that snarky kind of, this isn't sports entertainment, this is wrestling the way you missed it, blah, blah, blah. And so often, I think one of the things we really are learning, revisiting this, is, they weren't that far in a lot of ways from sports entertainment in these early shows. And like you just mentioned, WWE was kind of sometimes ebbing kind of away from that during this period at times. And then they kind of veer back in the other direction.
Yeah, they sort of, like SummerSlam 2002, I think, sort of out ROH'd ROH in terms of just being a straightforward old school wrestling show, which I think is interesting. But I will say this particular card has fewer silly backstage skits than I'd say any of the previous shows that we watched, except for maybe Road to the Title, but I think even this one has less than that.
Absolutely. It has that feeling of the first few shows in that there's just a ton of things being thrown at the wall, but most of it is happening in front of an audience as opposed to the other shows. So it does give it a different feel, I think, from every other show they've had so far. Even Road to the Title, I think, feels different because of the whole tournament aspect. Like you just mentioned, you'd see more repeats of talent. There's just two more things I think we should get to quickly before the show. And the first is something where basically I'm going to kind of plant a seed here for future shows and kind of give a little context to the world Ring of Honor was in at the time. Because Ring of Honor was, a Philly-based promotion at this point, even though they were expanding a little bit. And the Philly wrestling scene was very different back then. There was XPW, which was Rod Black's promotion, or Rob Black. There was 3PW run by Blue Meanie and Jasmine St. Clair. There was CZW still running and still to this day running. MLW would come in. Just a lot of promotions vying for that Philly audience, for the ECW fans trying to find a home. And there would be a lot of feuds and back dealing that would in some ways affect Ring of Honor more on coming shows. And so I'm going to read something from the Observer that it's going to pay more dividends on future Through the Years in a couple shows. But I wanted to give some context since it happened right around this show for something that will be happening in the future. So from the Observer at the time, there was a soap opera going on the past 2 weeks, but when the dust had cleared, XPW will be running a show on August 31st at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia. XPW, after attempting and being turned down in an attempt to use a license from several already licensed Pennsylvania promoters, since it was far too late to get its own license, struck a deal with Joe Blackburn of Heritage Wrestling. The basic gist of XPW is that owner and porn mogul Rob Black, who at one point wanted to buy into ECW, loves being in the wrestling business and the reaction it gets him in pissing everyone off. He's willing to lose money to get off on that reaction, so they run their outrageous TV and stunts. XPW has been a hot-button issue in the past, such as when in a publicity stunt, Black claimed he was going to kill a dog live on the internet. Outraged people contacted local Humane Society employees, which made sure it didn't happen, and Black claimed he was never going to do it anyway, just was doing it for the reaction. And another time, tried to get out the story he'd suffered a real stroke, although it was just a TV angle. The Messiah incident also had everyone freaked out. For people that don't know, Messiah was a wrestler indie wrestler at the time who was rumored to have been sleeping with Rob Black's wife, Lizzie Borden. Two people came to his house one day and cut off one of his thumbs, attempted to cut off his penis before he fought them off. People always wondered if Rob Black had sent them to do that. It became like a story that was even on America's Most Wanted at the time. Anyway, as mentioned here, Black had booked ECW Arena and started selling tickets, while not having a license to promote in Pennsylvania. They at first went to Rob Feinstein, because Feinstein and Kevin Kleinrock of XPW have a business relationship related to selling XPW videotapes, and Feinstein, who owns Ring of Honor, and asked to use his license. Ring of Honor turned them down, but did tell them about the Hartford Company, which is where they purchased their bond. Apparently XPW, when attempting to get a bond from that company, was told they needed a business address within the state of Pennsylvania. They used Feinstein's RF video address without his permission, and XPW actually put a copy of the bond on their website, apparently to prove they were going to be able to run the show. It didn't take long for people to become furious with RF Video because of the belief they were helping out XPW. Booker Gabe Sapolsky, in the midst of all this, said that even though the address was used without their permission, that he thought all the goodwill his company had gotten from its well-received shows had gone out the window. It did come out later in the week that Sapolsky's claims were true, and XPW used that address without permission. The Hartford Company confirmed that RF Video specifically called them and told them they had their address used. However, even after all that, by the end of the week, the Athletic Commission had approved the date because XPW had access to a license. All this red tape aside, this just shows the silliness in reality of athletic commissions and pro wrestling. And then a week or two later, Dave kind of just added one line to the story. XPW has targeted ROH as an enemy because of the address and licensing issue. So this will come to fruition in a couple shows. We'll see what XPW does to strike at Ring of Honor.
I wonder who wins the battle.
I mean, only listeners of the show will know. Yeah, but it's just there will be this was a bit of a long thing, but it's just to set up. There'll be more juicier tidbits in future shows where there are just so many little backbiting fights between XPW and CZW and Ring of Honor and 3PW. There's just such sniping going on at the time, and Rob Black is one of those classic sleazy kind of wrestling, those figures that thrive at least in the short term in wrestling. And it was just funny to me reading this, doing research, that XPW targeted Ring of Honor as an enemy because they had the temerity to not want all their credibility and address used without their permission.
Yep, it's weird. Although I will say Gabe was wrong about them losing all their goodwill. I don't think it really ended up making much of a difference at all.
Yeah, I'm sure Gabe got the vapors, but nothing too serious. But one last thing, that's moving on from kind of heavy news to more lighter, happier news. Matt, this is Steve Corino and Donnie B's final show announcing for Ring of Honor. Well, Corino would come back, but this is it. And our long national nightmare is coming to an end.
Donnie B left the world of professional wrestling to change his name to Donnie T and become the President of the United States.
Yes, and our long national nightmare there is maybe almost over. I'm not sure. We can only hope.
I admire your optimism.
Not to get too political, but I'm Canadian after all. Yes. But Donnie B, actually, I did a bit of research to find out what happened to Donnie B. And the most I could find was there was a PWI Insider column where he paid tribute to Iron Mike Sharp after his passing. And at the end of the column, it says that Donnie B went into a career in law enforcement. So I'd just like to say to Donnie B, everything I've said about you is a joke. I'm sorry. Don't hurt me. Don't come after me. My license plates are up to date. I'm sorry.
And as I've told you in private before, you're Canadian. If anyone's going to get beaten up over this, it's me. So thanks a lot.
You're so close. I'm so close to getting invaded, Matt. I have to cover my bases here. Mm-hmm. But the other thing is, I couldn't find an exact reason that Donnie B stopped commentating, but I did find the reason that Steve Corino did, and it's kind of a funny payoff to all this complaining, because apparently Steve Corino also wasn't that much of a fan of Donnie B, because I found a 2003 shoot interview Steve Corino did, and I've kind of summarized it here. And the interesting thing about this 2003 shoot interview was it was done by Ring of Honor, and so like most Ring of Honor shoot interviews, it was conducted by Gabe Sapolsky, because he was usually either him or Rob. And so you get this weird thing that would happen in shoot interviews of this time where Gabe would be interviewing a Ring of Honor wrestler about Ring of Honor, and they'd have to pretend that it wasn't Gabe Sapolsky interviewing them. Like, they would kind of joke about, like, oh, we'll just pretend you're not the booker of the company. So keep in mind that Gabe is asking him this. So during this interview, Gabe asks Steve, how about your Ring of Honor announcing career? And Steve kind of gives this very pointed line where he says, the first couple of tapes, I was real happy with it. And as fans of the show will note, those were the two shows that Eric Gargiulo did with Steve. So Corino kind of picks up on this and goes, why did you end up quitting? And Steve at first gives this very diplomatic answer that makes a lot of sense. He says, it was because of the Japan schedule. He was the lead gaijin for 01 and worked in their office. He said moving into the ring for Ring of Honor, as he soon would, he didn't think he had a lot of time between those two things. He didn't want Ring of Honor to become the Steve Corino show with him being both on air as a wrestler and doing the announcing. And he said he would have had to turn into more of a heel commentator, which I think is kind of interesting because we had that Twitter fan on Twitter asked Steve Corino why he was being so homophobic on the very first Ring of Honor show, and his response was, I was playing a heel commentator. But in this shoot interview, he talked about how he wanted to be a John Madden type, and in fact wasn't acting like a heel commentator. So kind of funny how his words changed over time. But Steve goes on to say he didn't think he had very good chemistry with Donnie B. He described them as two funny guys trying to be two funny guys on a serious product. I couldn't get comfortable and couldn't get the lines I wanted to hit down because he's an overwhelming personality. Nothing against the guy personally. Two-collar commentators, no play-by-play guy. And then Gabe actually pushes a little more. He says, you mentioned you were happy with the first couple of tapes. Is Donnie why you left? And Corino goes, yeah, I think so. I couldn't get a word in. Donnie would talk, and it was always long. They were 4 moves ahead when they got to me. So it's pretty interesting that Steve is basically I don't think Steve was a great color commentator at this time either, but it's funny to see him to see and hear him basically say some of the things we've been saying.
Yeah, although I sort of don't buy it completely because it wasn't going so well before Donnie B got there in the commentary. And obviously, like I said, Corino got better at commentary, but he was not good at this point either. And I don't know if he would have really fit going forward, even if Donnie B had left.
I think it was good that they both left, obviously, but I guess we'll get into the commentary maybe a little bit more later, but I guess we should finally start with the show proper. And the show opens with a backstage low-key promo, which is the third straight show to open with a backstage low-key promo. So really just pushing, that low-key is the face of Ring of Honor. This one, he just goes over the events of the last month's show, crowning a champion where he won the title. It's pretty standard as a promo goes. He claims that he lost 10 pounds during the match, the fabled super hot Iron Man match.
I believe it.
And the Observer actually said this too. So before this show came out, so I definitely believe I undersold it then last time because I said they probably all lost 5 pounds. Loki's claiming he lost 10. So that's if you want to cut weight for the UFC, just do one of these 60-minute Iron Man matches apparently because you'll drop.
That's the easy way to do it. Do it in 120 degrees. Whip, bam, boom.
Whip, bam, boom.
No sweat. Literally lots of sweat, but no sweat.
Lots of no sweat. He set up his title defense for AJ Styles tonight. Not much else to say about this segment.
Well, so Loki does this thing in his promos at this point where he repeats a phrase and he'll start multiple sentences with the same phrase. And this time it was, or he ends sentences with the same phrase, I should say. He's like, I wrestled for 60 minutes and I did it for one thing. I lost 10 pounds in 1 hour and I did it for one thing. And so that was his line for tonight. I did it for one thing. And that's something that I've noticed he's been doing a lot in promos, is where he does the repetition. So that's the style that he's going for. Not the best style.
That is one of those things I never noticed, and the second you said it, like my brain just raced to him doing that. Like, oh my God, he does do that. That is why you are the perceptive one of the two of us. We get a techno music video next, as usual. I was disappointed that they didn't give us they didn't use all the crazy cutaway effects they did last time. And we get one more little pre-show segment where Dixie and Izzy of Special K are outside the building standing next to a dumpster. So they're doing this Steve Corino and Simply Luscious style, right next to a dumpster. And it's just always funny to see these guys hang out next to dumpsters in wide open spaces where you could be anywhere else. They cut a promo, just not much. They act goofy. Izzy asks for water. Dixie pours it out. Elax pops out of the dumpster, which is why they were near the dumpster, and with water, acting all crazy and Elax-like, scaring the shit out of them. He tells them that they have a match tonight. I don't know how Elax knew this and they didn't. Izzy and Dixie don't care. They say they're just there to have fun because they're crazy raver kids. So this is the first Special K segment, I get. Well, actually, no, because we had that one where they were dancing with Brian XL.
Yes, the second Special K segment.
Yeah,
but we're learning more about these deep characters. They don't care. They just want to have fun. That's literally their catchphrase, basically.
Which is always a funny thing because it kind of makes I'm not going to look too deeply into Special K, but the idea of characters that don't really care about wrestling, that kind of makes you look bad when you lose to them. Like, we don't even care about this shit. This is just what we're passing time before we go to the rave tonight.
But to be fair, not too many wrestlers lost to them.
Although Izzy and Dixie were tag team champions.
We'll get to it.
We'll get there. We start the show with our first proper match, and that is Quiet Storm taking on the Amazing Red. And the Amazing Red defeats Quiet Storm 6 minutes, 5 seconds via pinfall after he hits the infrared and a standing shooting star press. Matt, would you like to take this one?
Well, Red, so he's supposed to miss a kick, but Storm gets hit in the head, so that was kind of rough. But so they start out with like usual tumbles and arm drags, but like a lot of the times I didn't think that looked that good in other matches, and I thought they looked really good here, and the crowd is pretty appreciative. And I appreciated that they started the show this time with like a real competitive match between two guys people cared about, which hasn't been done since the second ROH show ever, right? Which had Dragon against Daniels.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that. And I think the crowd did too. So Storm sort of acts like a heel by shaking Red's hand, but like kicking him in the stomach. By the way, I noticed just in the first match, this is sort of like an ECW fan cam type of vibe. Excuse me, because there's no hard cam. It's just totally the ringside handheld cameras for the entire show. So because of that, this is the first show, and I forget if we're going to get this on future shows, but because they have two
handheld cams instead of one handheld and a hard cam, we get lots of a lot of instant replays from the other handheld camera angle. So it seems like they try to tell these guys always stand on opposite ends of each other. So a lot of times you'd see a big move and they'd instantly cut to an instant replay of the exact same big move from the exact opposite side.
Yeah, and I think it kind of added a cool little thing to the show. Like I said, it felt like those like RF video ECW fan cams. So there's something to do with that. But because of all that, it's kind of hard to get a sense of just how big the crowd seemed, without that hard camera where you sort of saw the whole thing. But so they do a slap exchange in the middle of the ring. There's kind of a cool hang-on neck breaker into a gory driver by Quiet Storm. I thought Quiet Storm actually looked really good here. He does a Canadian Destroyer, which you mentioned he might have actually invented the Canadian Destroyer, but I don't know if we have any way of knowing that. But it is certainly a couple of years before we ever saw Petey Williams do it, who was just starting his wrestling career at this point. And this was definitely a Canadian Destroyer, right? It wasn't like modified; it was like the exact same move. So
no, it was a really good one too. Like he did a little bit of the running start, which I think makes the move better. It makes it a little
more plausible.
I think, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was funny because it was obviously the first time that Carino and Donnie had seen it, and they freak out about the move. And it seemed like everybody in the match didn't know how to react to it because the ref then counts a pin while Red's head is still between Storm's legs from the Destroyer, and his shoulders aren't even touching, like they're a foot off the mat on Storm's legs. So I just thought, like, no one knows how to react to this move. It's just, surprising everybody at this point.
Yeah, I guess because the ref sort of treated it like it was almost like one of those Code Red style, like sunset flip bomb sorts of things, where the shoulders are on the mat. But this is obviously more of a pile driver. On the commentary, Donnie B was comparing Quiet Storm to Chris Benoit, which I'd never thought of, but there is some similarity in like the way they're built, and Storm does go for the top rope headbutt, but Red hits sort of a diamond cutter on his way down. Red goes for some kind of confusing thing off the top rope, but he misses, and then he misses an infrared, but he hits a red star press for the win. And I thought this was fun. I think maybe could have used 3 or 4 extra minutes even. I think this was definitely the second best opener in ROH history. Not that that's saying much. It was the only other one that was a match. But I thought they did the right match for opening a show like this.
Yeah, I enjoy this. I mean, again, with the caveat, it's only 6 minutes, so there's only so much they could do. But for just 6 minutes to get the crowd pumped up and, big exciting spots, I don't know how much more they could have done to accomplish that goal better. One thing I thought that was really cool was even in a match with all these big spots, like Red does his flying flatliner, which he calls the Red Alert or the Red Eye, depending on where he wrestled. He did a big dive to the floor. He did this cool tiger mask running up the guy kick, but he kind of did it with a twist. He does all these cool spots, but some of the biggest reactions in this match are just for him throwing hard kicks. Like, this was a crowd that really seemed to enjoy guys beating each other up, and they would get more of that later.
Hard kicks were really in the early 2000s.
And unfortunately, like you said before about Red hitting guys hard, Red had a little bit of low key in him where that would come back in a show a few months down the road. Well, maybe quite a bit later, but Red could hurt guys a little bit with some of those kicks. Going back to the Canadian Destroyer thing, I'll give contact info at the end of the show, but if anyone knows an earlier instance of the Canadian Destroyer, please tell me, because I am genuinely curious if Quiet Storm invented this. And why I think he might have is Petey Williams had just barely started wrestling in 2002 around this time. And Quiet Storm does a Canadian Destroyer. And when I was reading Observers from a couple years later recently, Dave mentions, I guess he had probably done some article the issue before about Petey Williams and the Canadian Destroyer. He had written something about it. And then he did kind of a correction where he said, Amazing Red actually did the Canadian Destroyer in 2002 while, Petey Williams was still learning wrestling. And it's funny because he obviously is referencing this match and getting the person wrong, because he said it was Amazing Red doing it on a Ring of Honor show in Boston in 2002. So I think it's pretty obvious he means Quiet Storm doing it to Amazing Red in 2002. But the fact that that example stood out in Dave's mind as the earliest example he could think of a Canadian Destroyer makes me wonder, maybe Quiet Storm really did invent the Canadian Destroyer. And if he did, that's a huge blow to my country. That was one of the two things we had. We had the Destroyer and we have maple syrup. You've taken one of them, if that's the case. So someone please tell me that Petey Williams was backyard wrestling in 2000 and did it. If you know who invented it, please save my country's pride. Please, I'm begging of you.
Next thing I'm going to tell you is that Alanis Morissette is actually American.
Oh, Matt.
What?
Just don't. You're losing your gentleman cred here.
Well,
Do not twist the knife.
You learn, huh, Trevor? You learn.
Oh my.
You learn.
Am
I gonna get sued?
No, you're gonna get requests to sing more every episode. The more you do it, the better it's gonna get.
Gotcha.
Red, I actually really enjoyed that. Red. So yeah, the other thing is Red finished with like you said, the infrared. And one thing I'm noticing in these matches is the infrared is a really cool move. Red can only pull it off half the time. He's either really crashing hard on a guy's legs, or in this case, he almost completely misses Storm and just barely clips the top of his head, and then he follows it up with the standing shooting star press. But I would not want to take the infrared because it feels like he can barely pull it off, and you're lucky if he doesn't just completely kill you on it. And other than that, though, again, fun for 6 minutes. Just put your, check your brand at the door, see guys do cool stuff, hit each other hard, like a good way to open the show. And from there, we get a little post-match handshake between Red and Storm, as is customary. But then Elax, Izzy, Dixie, and Brian XL run in to attack. And this is Donnie B's first mention of the name Special K. This is the first time Special K, the name of the stable, is uttered. Even though technically I would say the group started on the last show, this is the first time they're referred to by that name. This leads to the SAT and Chris Devine running in, and that leads immediately to our next match, which is the very first scramble match. Chris Devine and the SAT of Joel and Jose Maximo defeating Special K of Brian XL, Dixie and Izzy with Elax in 9 minutes.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish saying the time. I'm sorry.
Yeah, in 9 minutes, 6 seconds after one of the Maximos pinned Brian XL after the Spanish Fly.
Yeah, and so Elax joined Special K just because he happened to be near them in a dumpster. So they actually literally, they said they didn't care. They didn't care so much. They didn't care if somebody who just they happened to bump into who was standing in a dumpster randomly by them just joined their stable and hang around with them and join their matches and got involved in their livelihood just because they happened to bump into him near a dumpster. So that's a whole other level of not caring.
Matt, he brought them a bottle of water. I mean, you got to give him something back for that bottle of water. That's at least $1.50 item probably at that building.
Well, he also informed that they had a match, so he's really making moves, this guy.
Yeah. It's amazing that Elax, he's one of the guys on a show where it feels like they're throwing so many guys at you. I mean, why did they feel the need to pay Elax? I don't even know if they paid him, but just having another guy on the show, Elax just randomly showing up for a skit and to come on the show, I have no idea. Before I talk about the match, I'll mention this is Brian XL's final match as an ROH regular. He would come back for a couple of the big Special K crazy 100-men scramble matches, but this is his last match as a regular every show performer. And it may be because I don't know if he ever ended up doing this, but the Observer at the time said that Brian XL is moving to Puerto Rico with his family. So I would assume that's why although I saw him on Cage Match doing research that he was working for other indies still, but maybe ROH just didn't want to pay to get him from Puerto Rico.
It's interesting. When they say his family, does that mean like he moved there with like his parents? Because he did seem pretty young.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. Because with family, to me, that does suggest parents. Because I don't think you would say that if that was his wife. But I'm not sure. And Brian XL is still wrestled for many more years after this. But I guess Puerto Rico was kind of the breaking point for Ring of Honor.
Well, his greatest legacy in ROH was that he was the bridge to the creation of Special K.
That is actually his biggest legacy, along with losing to Eddie Guerrero in the main event of Night of Appreciation.
That's right.
The official main event, let it be known. And this is a crazy, big, sloppy spot fest. I would say this is a better version, but this is a more indulgent version of all the Mikey Whipwreck student spot fests of the first few shows. It's sloppier, it's got even crazier moves, it's longer than some of them. Well, maybe not actually. That might actually be shorter than some of them. It's just crazier all around. Lots of exciting stuff, lots of stuff. I was constantly on edge watching this match. It felt like everyone was close to killing themselves or killing somebody else at some point. Dizzy and Dixie, I keep saying Dizzy. Dixie and Izzy.
That's a good name for them.
God, this is going to be one of the banes of my existence on these shows. But Dixie and Izzy, right near the start, they both take a turn getting dropped right on their heads by the SAT. I thought they looked pretty good, for their first full match that we get to see. They bumped well and did big moves just with the best of them, and they'd be the guys of this match that stuck around the longest in Ring of Honor. I thought Brian XL looked sub-backyarder in this. I thought this was one of the worst individual performances I've seen from a wrestler in Ring of Honor thus far. He has some of the worst looking Hurricane Ranas in wrestling history, and normally when I see something this bad, I would write it off as, oh, he screwed one up. I've seen him do these Ranas on multiple shows. They are absolutely awful. They're like he barely sometimes gets his arms at their armpits and just kind of takes their body over. He does an absolutely embarrassing bump where he gets hit and then he stumbles halfway across the ring into the ropes and then tries to take himself over the ropes and barely can. He fails halfway through and has to jump himself over the ropes again. When everyone does a big dive train, his dive, he falls so close to the apron, everyone basically has to catch him so he doesn't hit right on the ring apron and kill himself. It's funny because Brian XL got, other than Red, probably the most individual attention in backstage segments in the first few Ring of Honor shows. He got, the Eddie Guerrero thing, and yet he was going to be, it looked like, the leader of Special K because he was the impetus for the group forming, if not for this move to Puerto Rico. But yet, I think he's the worst of all of them. He looks maybe it's just his Ring of Honor performances, but he looks absolutely terrible here, Matt.
Oh, well, as far as what I've ever seen of him, which is just what he's done in ROH, he's definitely the worst of all the Special K guys. It's not. I don't think it's even close. I mean, maybe some of the guys that show up for a very brief run later on are worse, but definitely compared to Izzy and Dixie, he's a lot worse. That said, despite his bad performance, I thought that this match was pretty good for one of these matches, at least comparatively. It's the first match, like you said, that they call the scramble rules match, where you fall out of the ring, someone else comes in, and there's just lots of the moves and stuff. And I'd say it's pretty fast-paced. I thought that the SAT looked better than usual. They do the whole that the Special K have no respect because they're going to a rave after the show gimmick, which becomes this is kind of something they say so many times that it's like, oh my god, stop saying this by the 6th month of the gimmick's existence. But right now it's new, and I couldn't keep up with some of Donnie B's move names. At one time, he calls I think it was like a space flying tiger job. He calls it a tiger star press. He calls he calls a standing moonsault a front star press. Um, it's true. He's really Donnie being it up in his final performance, I will say. But I I thought it was really cool. There was like this crazy Guerrero special double submission thing on Dixie and Brian XL by the SAT, and Donnie B calls it the human taffy machine, and I actually think that's a perfectly fine name for it. I can't really fault him for that one. I can't think of a better name for that one. And they do a double underhook power bomb onto Izzy. The match breaks down. There's a double tower power bomb on Izzy and Dixie, where they both get power bombed, like one on top of the other. Spanish Fly on Brian XL ends it. And I wrote that it was sloppy and ridiculous, but very entertaining, and the crowd loved it. So I think so far, for what you expect to get at the opening couple matches on an indie show in 2002, I feel like they've delivered so far in the first 20 minutes of the show.
And this is something Gabe would do often, where he would love to have these kind of matches sometimes open, like the big crazy spot fest. So he gives you two here. And I agree. I thought this was the best of all the Whipwreck student spot fests so far. It was sloppier in some ways, but it shot higher. It was quicker pace, just even crazier things attempted.
And actually, if you actually go back and watch some of the early ones, I wouldn't say this is sloppier. They do more stuff, and it's sloppy, but I would say it's notably less sloppy. Like the moves actually hit in a cooler way than they do in some of those earlier matches.
It might have also been, I was just, for some reason this match, I got really, like I said before, I got really scared watching. Like, I was kind of on the edge of my seat, even though knowing these guys survived it. It just, there was something about watching these guys, in a way it adds to the matches, where I'm constantly just like, oh shit, don't kill yourselves. And
please don't die. Please don't die.
Please don't die, even though you're not Paul London. Elax even does a dive here, which I thought was kind of a goofy thing, where Ring of Honor is always, pushing so hard. We follow the rules. We have the strict rules in the Code of Honor. And Elax is a guy who's just a second. He's not a wrestler in the match. And right in front of the referee, he does a dive from the top turnbuckle to the outside on everybody. But again, scramble rules. This is the first of a match that Gabe would fall in love with, these scrambles. And even though the scramble rules are technically just a big match where if someone goes to the outside, then someone can come in without tagging. Really, what scramble rules matches just meant was crazy spot fests where everyone comes in and does shit.
Pretty much.
So, at this point, at the end of the match, Chris Devine gets on the mic, and he calls out Low Ki, saying he doesn't even want a title shot. He just wants to test himself to see if Chris Devine's as good as he thinks he is himself. And Low Ki comes out, and we get something really weird, because if Chris Devine was seeing how he was testing himself against Low Ki, he flunked with a Q-, I would say, because Low Ki destroys Chris Devine in 53 seconds by making him submit to the Dragon Clutch. I have no idea why they did this. Low Ki comes out early in the show now for this. He beats the living... he just does a standard Low Ki squash. He kicks him. At one point, Chris Devine is beaten to the point where he's not intentionally doing it, but he's cowering. He's got his head on the mat, covering himself. He gets squashed in under a minute, and not that Chris Devine's a big guy to worry about, but I don't know what the point of this was. And at one point, Donnie B calls this a valiant effort by Chris Devine. He lost in 53 seconds, and the only offense he had were 2 or 3 chops he threw at Low Ki before the bell when he ambushed him.
This is the sort of thing that if WWE did it, people would really shit on them pretty hard for just having their main eventer squash a guy. There was really, I don't really have much to say about it other than I have no idea why they did it or what good it did anybody. Like, the idea was supposed to introduce the crowd to Low-Ki's moves. I mean, I think that the crowd is probably mostly familiar with them, and that was not necessary. So, I think this was just a waste.
And yeah, this crowd seemed to know everybody on the show, and so you did not need to introduce Low-Ki. It did no service to anybody. It just filled another couple minutes of time. From there, we get a promo from Japan, because we get Christopher Daniels in Japan in front of a big Japanese wrestling poster, which he humorously has taped a picture of Curryman to, which is his Japanese masked Michinoku Pro gimmick. He gives us a promo where he addresses a few things. He lets us know he's in Japan, so he won't be at the show tonight. It's the first Ring of Honor show Christopher Daniels is missing. He feels like he's been screwed out of the title by Low-Ki. He says a new member of the Prophecy will debut on this show, even though he's not there. And it's just the usual Christopher Daniels promo where he's good at taking making 3 or 4 points when a lot of guys in the promotion at this point are struggling with just getting even 1 point across.
Yeah, definitely, I would say the only actually actively good promo guy in the company at this point. There are other guys who are decent, not bad. Daniels is the only one that's actually cutting good promos.
And it's worth, I guess, noting at this point, like I just said, Daniels is not on the show. This is the first one he misses. And Spanky is not on this show because 01 decided to book him late for another tour. So this is a show where they're losing 2 of their big names, 2 of the 4 people in their main event from the last show. And
they still managed to have 14 matches, so they got a lot of options, I guess.
And one of the options, maybe not the best option, was Dunn and Marcos wrestling the Christopher Street Connection, and the Christopher Street Connection of Buffy and Mace with Allison Danger beat Dunn and Marcos in 341 when Mace pinned Dunn after the Gay Basher, which is their double team finisher where one guy hoists their opponent up kind of like they're going to do a heart attack, and then the other guy comes off with a big butt drop, kind of like the doink whoopee cushion. So like an assisted whoopee cushion, basically, which is also a great thing to buy from a dollar store. Matt, it's your turn to say anything. I don't know how much you can go into about a 3-minute 41-second Christopher Street Connection squash, but here you go.
Well, I thought it was interesting to have the Christopher Street Connection on offense because they really hadn't been given a chance to do that. And I thought they actually, Buffy at least, looked kind of okay. Like his moves actually were decent, and they had some like tag team strategy where they were like cutting off the ring. So I mean, there was nothing to the match, but you could see that the Christopher Street Connection were more than what ROH was letting them be. I will say this, it does seem like the Boston audience was more homophobic than the Philadelphia audience. That's not entirely surprising, but no one in the audience wanted a kiss. And one audience...
No, there was a guy.
Well, yeah, so I wrote, no one in the audience wanted a kiss until like near the very end of the entrance, a guy called them over, and they kissed him on the cheek. And he was like, kind of like, ugh. But...
I thought that guy had very poor form because he encouraged them to kiss him, and then just when he's leaning in, he turns so he gets the kiss on the cheek and like the neck instead. And come on, guy, if you're gonna get the milk, get the whole milk. Don't skimp out. Don't treat yourself. Get the full kiss.
That's right. And also, one audience member screamed at Buffy, "You're going to hell." So I never heard that in the Philly crowd. So I do think that this is a legitimately a more homophobic crowd than the crowds in Philly. The announcers are slightly less negative in the sense that they call them oddly entertaining. They still do the whole like ooh with some of or ew with some of Christopher Street Connection's antics. So it's not perfect. It's still slightly negative. They still do the whole alternative lifestyle stuff, but yeah, nothing much to say about this. They're slowly evolving their portrayal of the CSC, slowly but surely.
It was the interesting thing to me, other than how they treated the Christopher Street Connection, was it was weird to see after the way they've been treated in these first few shows, the Christopher Street Connection kind of getting a squash match where they're doing the squashing. They were chopping Dunn and Marcos fairly hard and dominating and doing it kind of serious while then mixing in some of their more gay themed spots. And like you said, one of the bravest things these guys did is Buffy proceeded to start. This is what prompted the guy telling him that they were going to hell. He was kissing and licking a couple of the guardrails, and you're pretty brave to lick some of those guardrails.
Well, in the Bible, it says a lot about doing sexual acts with guardrails, so that's why he said he was going to hell. Spare
the guardrail, spoil the child. Yeah, like it was a goofy, crazy thing that he was doing. They were obviously inciting those reactions, even if those were pretty horrible, unjustifiable actions to tell guys like, you're going to hell. But like you said, the announcers continue to kind of evolve a little bit where, as you mentioned, all of a sudden now the Christopher Street Connection are strangely and slightly entertaining. So they're slowly continuing to dip their foot in a little more in the waters of maybe these guys aren't bad.
So we never get to see Carino and Donnie B fully get to the point where they fully embrace the Christopher Street Connection, sadly enough, because they leave. And I wonder, just Gargiulo was definitely the most homophobic of all of them, wouldn't you say? In terms of how his announcing. So we never found out how he would, if he could ever appreciate the Christopher Street Connection.
If we ever get Gabe on, we'd have to ask him, were they building to a big thing where at the first year anniversary show, Steve and Donnie just came out of the closet and they're like, we're gay, we were overcompensating.
Are we officially trying to get Gabe on now? Is that a thing? Because if so, I'm all in on that one.
That's going to be our big, huge series finale where we talk to the voice of God and we challenge him. Why did you create us? Why have you let us down in some ways? What was it like to see Jimmy Jacobs come out to a field of cell phones?
Gabe, if you're listening and you feel like if you have all the time in the world to sit down and watch the entire 3 hours of your unscripted DVD, then you could be on the next show with us. But you do have to watch the entire show. And
skimping, Gabe.
And take notes. And bring your notes from the time. All that stuff.
Well, it was unscripted. They didn't have any notes.
That's right. But he probably took a journal about how sad he was that he had to unscript it. So...
Just a lot of eraser marks.
I should make all these unscripted jokes next month.
You're giving away the story here, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
Saying too much. Note to self. Scoot Andrews takes on Mike Tobin with Danny Drake, and Scoot squashes Mike Tobin in 2 minutes, 3 seconds after he hits a force of nature.
So we're at 2 squashes so far.
Yes.
Count them, 2.
There's not much to this. It's a squash. Danny Drake is still injured in a wheelchair like he was on the last show. Scoot comes to the ring wearing a Boston Bruins hat to pander to the crowd, Sonny Sakai style. So that's what he learned from his friend Sonny Sakai on Road to the Title.
Sumi Sakai.
Oh, Sumi. Go! That's my big error. But Sumi...
It's unforgivable.
Unforgettable, unscripted, unforgettable. But Sumi comes with... she came with the Phillies hat, so he comes with the Bruins hat. Tobin has a nice springboard leg drop, but shortly after he does that, he and Andrews have an ugly miscommunication spot where Tobin's coming off the ropes. And
that's your cute nickname for him.
That's what I call him when we're just hanging out being chums. When Toby's coming right off the ropes and both guys have completely different ideas about what to do, and they kind of just freeze in the middle of the ring. So they whip him again and do the right spot. Not much to say. This is a 2-minute squash.
Yep. I have nothing to say about this.
Yeah.
Other than it's just giving 2 guys a payday, I guess.
Then Xavier comes out and he references Scoot beating him on the last show, and he challenges him to an impromptu rematch where Xavier beats Scoot Andrews in 4 minutes, 4 seconds after a 450 splash. The commentators here mentioned that Prince Nana was supposed to be there and couldn't make it, so I assume he was Xavier's original opponent.
Yeah.
This is Scoot Andrews' last match in Ring of Honor, I think. This is it for him. And not a great run for Scoot. And I didn't think he looked bad, but he didn't exactly get spotlighted or...
He never had the chance to have like a good match at all. He was always wrestling Xavier. Pretty much, or getting squat. I mean, really, every single one of his matches involved in Xavier, except for the one squash against Daniels, right?
Yeah, and the Toby match, the old Toby that he
Yeah,
had right now.
I guess if you count that one, yeah.
Old Toby. But I guess that was going to be his big send-off. But this is, if you've ever seen any of the other Xavier Scoot Andrews matches, this is 4 minutes of every single one of them. Not bad, but nothing special.
They do a lot of like whips, and I always think if there's too many matches where, I mean, if a match has too many like whips and whips into the corner and whip, I always think that's a sign of a not good match, because it means that they're not able to use wrestling as a transition that well. It's not 100% of the time, but I find that it's a decent rule of thumb.
Actually, now that I think about it, I would agree. Yeah, because you're basically just setting up each spot by setting up a spot.
Yeah, exactly.
But otherwise, this is the usual perfectly adequate and forgettable match between these two. One thing, I guess, were you going to say Xavier hits a big Arabian press to the floor?
Yeah, that's right. The springboard moonsault, where it does the springboards off the rope onto the and then jumps to hit the Arabian press from like the middle of the ropes, and that's like a move that he does a bunch. But this is its ROH debut, and I think it's definitely the coolest thing that he does.
And it is a reminder also that he wins with the 450. He was a good athlete for a guy carrying that much muscle. There's just something in these performances where there's something missing from him. And perfectly average match, but I mean average for 4 minutes, I guess, but I don't know if Scoot. That's the problem with this. I'm watching Scoot Andrews' Ring of Honor run. I don't know if he deserved better. I thought he showed flashes of being good, but again, like you said, he worked mostly just with Xavier, and a lot of these matches didn't even get that much time. So I really don't know how to judge him. But for whatever reason, Ring of Honor decided not to keep using him.
Yeah, I mean. He was definitely. There's not really much to say. It was a fairly unremarkable run, and he was just one of those guys that didn't make the cut when they started kind of codifying their roster a little bit more in terms of who they were really going to feature.
And the one thing I noticed on commentary is they really tried to sell this as a big end of the an end to a big feud, and it felt anything but that. It felt the worst way a feud can feel at the end, which is it felt like no one was any better off than when they started. It felt like everyone was exactly where they were when this started, if not maybe a little bit worse. I mean, obviously in Scoot's case it was worse because he went from being a guy that was booked for every show to a guy that was never booked again. So just not the matches were never bad, but it's just not a good feud at all.
Yeah, and they had big plans for Xavier, which we'll get to next month. And maybe those big plans were sort of contingent on him not being impressive, which is interesting to say, but it sort of, when we get there, it sort of makes sense, right?
Yeah. We'll have to explore that theory more month by month through the years, or the next year, as we see Xavier's reign. But I guess there's nothing else to say about this match. So Michael Shane and Biohazard are pulling up to the building in a car, and a cocky Michael Shane gets out of the car and brags that once you win a contract like he did on the last show, you get flown in, you get sweet rent-a-cars. He tells Biohazard that if he sticks with Michael Shane, he'll be all right in this world. And then he tells Biohazard to park the car and get his bags, because he's a heel now.
Yep, officially heel. I guess last month was his heel turn, but this month they really are like, all right, we're going with this Michael Shane heel character.
And that leads directly to Michael Shane being led to the ring by Biohazard, taking on Paul London, being led to the ring by Rudy Boy Gonzalez. Shane beats Paul London via pinfall in 12 minutes, 44 seconds with a small package. Matt, I thought this was the best match on the show so far. What did you think?
I thought it was good. I thought maybe not as good as I expected, but it was definitely a good match. They definitely go with the Shane heel thing, right? Shane jumps London from behind at the beginning, and London really just comes back pounding Shane on the mat. Shane gets backdropped onto Biohazard on the floor, but London dives onto both of them. And Carino on commentary gets angry at Rudy Boy. I at this point I was getting really sick of the whole Carino Rudy Boy thing on commentary. I just think it came off as grating. I thought this match was maybe the bottoming out of the Donnie B Carino pairing, except for maybe the whole thing with Carino and Simply Luscious from Night of Appreciation, but but it was just the whole thing of Carino getting on Rudy Boy, Donnie B getting on Michael Shane for being despicable. And it was just, I don't know, they were just very irritating in this match. I thought this was like the match where I was like, all right, thank God they're not going to be commentating anymore. I just couldn't stand it. But the match itself was good. They did a really crazy spot that I'm surprised doesn't get more play in like highlight reels and stuff, or didn't, when they were still doing highlight reels of early ROH, which was where London springboards to the top with his back to the ring, and Shane shoves him off, past the ring post, and he flies over the ring post onto a guardrail and just completely takes out the guardrail. I thought the spot was visually insane. It was probably actually insane. The crowd went nuts for it. Then Shane goes right after him. He throws him into other guardrails. He does like a over the head belly to belly that Donnie B, of course, calls a bear hug suplex. And sends London. He does it, but he does it into the turnbuckle. So, which is, you don't see it as often back then. London comes back and slams Shane's head into the corner, or into the canvas, I should say. London hits Shane with a series of chops, and then does sort of a top rope X Factor by Shane onto London for 2. Then Shane cranks on London's legs. The crowd is starting to get really behind London. This is really the first time he gets to do the whole face in peril thing, and he's not surprisingly really good at it. So there's a big applause when he makes the ropes. He reverses a powerbomb into a Rana for 2. Then there's a corkscrew backsplash on the floor onto Shane. And the announcers play up the fact that Shane is injured like Marvel was after the corkscrew backsplash thing, and this corkscrew senton, I guess I should say. Don't want to go all Donnie B on you. And so the ref pushes London away as he's trying to like go after Shane, and like they're really playing it up like Shane is hurt. And they're like, oh, this is really sad. This is what happened to Chris Marvel. And while this is happening, Shane rolls London up for the pin, so sort of like he's playing possum. And it was good, well worked. I didn't think it was memorably good, other than that one spot. But it was signs of what was to come. And I think Shane made a good showing of himself here. After the match, they do a whole thing with Simply Luscious in the ring, and she invites Shane to join the Prophecy, and Rudy Boy interrupts. He tells Shane not to join, and Rudy, I don't know what his history is, but he was as bad at promos as pretty much any of the indie guys, I would say. But so he asked Shane not to join. Shane super kicks Luscious, then Rudy Boy, and Carino does not even seem upset that Michael Shane super kicked his girlfriend. He was just like, oh, it's business, whatever, which was also annoying. And Shane and Biohazard beat up London post-match. Shane drops the big elbow on London, and there's a round of applause for London after he gets up after the match. So this is like they're really going for it with Shane here. This is like his big moment to win a match that was good, that got some decent time, and then just really be a dastardly heel, beating everybody up and being a loner.
In fact, in the Observer at the time, before the show, I think maybe reviewing the show, Dave notes he's been told that Michael Shane is going to be given a strong push. So Ring of Honor was really high on young Michael Shane at this time. I agree. I thought this was a good match, but just good. Like you mentioned, you referred to it as not memorably good. Yeah, I would say it's a good match, but nothing that's ever going to be on a best of list or something you recommend. It's just good. I thought it was refreshing, though, on this card, because even though I had enjoyed a bunch of the stuff on this card, like the first 2 spot fests, everything was short and crazy, and so it was kind of refreshing to just get a regular wrestling match that got a decent amount of time, almost 13 minutes. It was almost like I love junk food, but after you eat a bunch of junk food, sometimes you appreciate just a simple salad and a chicken breast. I felt this was kind of your simple salad and a chicken breast. It wasn't amazing, but it was good and kind of and what I feel like the card needed at this point. There was a little bit of intensity, not a ton, but throwing punches at the start, and at one point Paul London rammed Michael Shane's head, the back of a head into the mat a few times. So they fought a little, like they had a little bit of hate between each other. Like you said, the Paul London spot where he gets shoved off the top turnbuckle into the guardrail, that's, if you have access to the show, worth going out of your way to see. It is a crazy spot. When we think about Paul London, we think about a spot he would do on the next show where he runs up a ladder, and we think about please don't die chants. But he was doing crazy things, it seems like, on a lot of these shows, and it's wild that we don't remember some of these things, because this spot, I know there's ways people can think, there's ways people fall into guardrails. He took this really hard. Like I said on the last show, how Paul London just seemed to be a guy that you could tell had no fear. This bump he took with no fear. He just took it as crazy as he could, breaks the guardrail, and then later when he does the dive where Michael Shane fakes the Chris Marvel injury, Paul London hits his ankles really hard on the guardrail. So just the man was a madman, and he obviously hated guardrails. You know, Buffy loved them. He hated them. The one other thing I thought was interesting was when they try and sell the Michael Shane fake ankle break, where he's repeating the Chris Marvel injury, Donnie and Steve get real serious. They do their kind of serious voices, like, oh my God. And it's funny because when Chris Marvel actually broke his ankle, Steve Corino was cracking jokes the entire time. So I thought it was pretty funny that, like, now we're supposed to believe he's being really serious. But
yeah, I mean, I guess it was an evolution of how they produced the product, but, you know, it kind of goes, I guess, to what Corino actually said, which is it's two comedy guys, and it just doesn't really work. And, you know, like we said, this is their last time to do commentary together.
And I would say this is their second worst performance. I was talking to you the other day, and I said I actually thought I was after their first show, Night of Appreciation, which I think is their dirt worst ever and one of the worst commentary performances I've ever heard. I thought they got a slight bit better, and I probably wondered if that was just that hearing you and me talk about on the podcast was making me laugh and making me just enjoy it more. But this show is their second worst and might rival Night of Appreciation. It is terrible. At one point, Donnie B, well, he does this a few times during the show. He sells way too hard when someone tries to be a heel. Like, when he knows someone is supposed to be the heel, he sells things that aren't even that heelish as just horrible things. When London gets shoved off the top turnbuckle, there's nothing illegal about that move, but Donnie B acts like Michael Shane just did the most evil, illegal thing possible, doing a smart counter, shoving a guy off a turnbuckle before he was going to hit him with something. And Donnie B is just trying way, way too hard here. I wish he would try that hard at researching these matches, but he doesn't. But again, as a match, good, not great. I felt like the big spots were memorable. I feel like it kind of meandered a bit down the stretch. Shane started putting London in submissions, which in a way is good heel dominating work, but he didn't really work them in a way that that engaged you. It was a good match, though, and unlike the Xavier Scoot Andrews feud, I actually came away from this match wanting to see them wrestle again, which is the point of a feud.
Yes, although I want to see them wrestle again because I've seen their next match and I already know that I like it. So,
oh, you're cheating.
That's right.
I wipe my mind for every one of these matches. But yeah, afterwards we get, like you said, the Simply Luscious and Michael Shane thing where she gives the invite. I'll just note that when Michael Shane hits Simply Luscious, that makes this Ring of Honor 6 for 6 on man-on-woman violence. So,
yep, they really like to do that. It's uncomfortable, but like I said, like, I don't want to make excuses, but I think they're just trying to get that ECW thing, and ECW did that all the time too.
We've gotten to the point where they've done it on every show that it does now feel like it's just a box they're checking off. Like there's got to be a spot on the show where a woman gets beat up. It just has to happen.
I feel completely confident that there was.
Yeah, it's weird because there's always one. They always just and maybe it's just that that's the only thing they can think to do with women, but it does feel like it's a conscious decision that we have to have one of these on every show.
I think that, the fan base did like it. As sick as it is to say, like, I'm not saying that's a good reason to do it. You retrain them, but they knew their audience.
And for more younger fans, this is before intergender wrestling. This had a completely different connotation. When back then when wrestlers beat up valets, it was not just a fair fight. And Shane and Biohazard beat on London for a while. They leave, like you said. London gets the big reaction. And on to our next match. American Dragon takes on Donovan Morgan, and this goes to a 15-minute time limit draw. So, if you're wondering why this went to a time limit draw, apparently, according Dave Meltzer writes in The Observer, people are starting to catch on that the Noah guys can't do jobs on U.S. indie shows except to each other. So, apparently, I guess the insinuation was that's why Donovan Morgan did not lose here to American Dragon. I assume that's probably why Donovan Morgan would end up spending most of his time in Ring of Honor in tag matches in the future, because that's a way that you don't have to have as many of these kind of problems. The other guy can take the fall. But this was a match, another good match, I thought. Not great, but good. Dragon and Morgan are on a different level in terms of, from most of the guys on these shows, in terms of polish, just the mechanics, being smooth and looking comfortable in the ring with what they're doing. Dragon did some really good simple limb work to start, but he just comes at it with an intensity. And Dragon in this match, I noticed, Danielson would get over the years a lot of Benoit comparisons, but this is one of those matches where I actually really saw it, where he has that same kind of Benoit-esque intensity to every move, where every move is kind of snapped off with 100% dedication. There's just that extra little bit, a level of polish where I feel like a lot of guys on the indies learn moves till they're 90% comfortable with their move, and then they go, okay, I know that move, I know how to do it, I want to learn another move. And I feel what separates some guys that are real craftsmen is they just drill moves till everything looks just so sharp. And I really noticed that with Dragon here, and to a lesser extent with Donovan Morgan. I feel like where this match kind of falters a bit, where it goes good instead of great, is they go in a couple interesting places, and they never really go there all the way. Like, Dragon does some nice arm work, I think, to Morgan at the start. It's never followed up on, never sold afterwards. Morgan, at one point, takes the match to the outside and starts tossing Dragon into the guardrail and stuff. And it looks like maybe we could get a more intense kind of heelish performance from Morgan, but then it just goes back into the ring and kind of goes as a regular technical match. The match ends up being mostly kind of a colorless technical wrestling match, but the work itself, as far as colorless technical wrestling matches, I thought was very enjoyable.
Yeah, it was interesting because, this is supposed to be Morgan's debut as a member of the Prophecy, but he works pretty much totally as a babyface. He even tries to get the crowd to start doing like the clap thing, where he's like, to like cheer them both on, which is definitely not something that heels do, as far as I can tell. I noticed also that Dragon had a little bit of stubble, so maybe he was toying with with the character that he would end up becoming famous for. No, probably not. He probably just didn't shave. But I like to think of that. And it's funny because just to go on with his WWE character, Carino actually makes fun of him for being boring here, which is it's like, all right, Michael Cole, we get it already.
That's always the worst thing to do as an announcer, in my opinion, is sell a wrestler as boring.
Yeah,
and it's also disingenuous because he had fawned over Dragon in earlier matches on Ring of Honor, and I know it's because Dragon now has an association with Rudy Boy, and Korean was supposed to wrestle Dragon on the next show, but then he mentions in commentary that he's not actually because of the 0-1 commitment, but he just says he has better things to do. But it just comes off as so fake and disingenuous and not as good healing.
Right.
But sorry.
No, I completely agree. I completely agree with that. It comes off as disingenuous and forced. I did notice that Dragon was working on Morgan's arm for like a really long time before Morgan came back at all, and then he hit sort of the backdrop driver for the comeback. So that was interesting. But yeah, it was very solid work, but like you said, totally bland, and Morgan didn't really do anything to really make his character stand out. I did think Donnie B did one good thing in this match, which was, Dragon was hitting him repeatedly in the back of the head, and I don't think I would have really noticed that if Donnie B hadn't pointed out that Dragon was targeting Morgan's head. It didn't really go anywhere, but I thought that was good of Donnie B to do. I don't think every announcer would have pointed that out, unless, maybe Gabe gave him notes before the match, but, I'm not sure. And then also at the end, I thought maybe Dragon had Morgan in the cattle mutilation for a little too long before the bell rang, like maybe almost implausibly long, considering, how long other guys have been in it. But otherwise, it was just basic but solid.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, yeah, I should mention that's how the match ended, where the time limit expired with Dragon having Morgan in the cattle mutilation. And I guess because of that finish, he was forced to leave the hold in maybe for a few more seconds. But I agree about Donnie B actually being good at a couple times on the show about pointing out work, like where someone's focusing on a body part. But he also called a Morgan forearm in this match a shoot forearm. So I guess every other forearm in wrestling is fake, and that was the one real one. So thanks, Donnie, for telling us about that.
To be fair to Donnie B, that is not the only time in ROH history they pulled something like that. And this one was at least probably an accident. Other times they did that on purpose.
This is also a match where I think one other thing I want to give Dragon credit for, I thought he was really good at bumping here. I noticed whenever Morgan gave him a suplex or a backdrop driver, he was really giving him a jump. He was going up super easy and making all those suplexes look really good. I thought this was a really good performance for Dragon, just in terms of everything. Like it was far from his best match in Ring of Honor so far, but I think if you just zeroed in on Dragon, the little things he was doing, he was showing off just again how good he was, how complete he was in a lot of ways, just in terms of the different parts of an in-ring wrestling. Just I was really impressed by his individual performance here. Not that Morgan was even bad, but it was a good match with a very good performance, I would say.
Yeah, isn't it amazing watching this? I mean, I know it kind of goes without saying that, like, to realize you're watching the guy who ends up being like the most popular babyface in American pro wrestling to the mainstream in like the past decade.
It's
I'd say, but let's say the past 7 years.
Yeah, and it's crazy to think that he would get over doing something so, like, I liked it, but so silly as the yes chant. Like, it's crazy to think, not only will this guy become a huge star, but he'll have this giant beard and long hair and just be known for doing this crazy chant.
Yeah, and I shouldn't say most popular babyface, because that's still Cena. But let's say most beloved babyface.
And he was red hot for a relatively short time. He main evented a WrestleMania. The whole show was built around him, so I wouldn't undersell. He was huge.
Yeah. And
so after this match, Donovan Morgan and American Dragon, they do the usual, tease for 5 more minutes. Dragon gets on the mic and talks about how in this match, Morgan's proved that he's better than the Prophecy, so shake his hand. Morgan teases and won't shake. And one thing I thought that they made a mistake here is when the crowd is wanting 5 more minutes, they have the ref say no to 5 more minutes and leave. And I feel like they could have given that to Morgan, because you're putting half the heat then on the ref instead of
all the
heel.
Heat.
In fact, the crowd starts chanting, "Kill the ref." You're making, and especially it would have been so simple because Morgan was caught in the cattle mutilation at the end of the match. So it would have been perfect for him to chicken out and say, I don't want to wrestle anymore.
Yeah, and Dragon even says the ref is too much of a coward to give them 5 more minutes, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't get why you would do this. It's something Gabe has done in the future, because I remember 2 or 3 years ago in Evolve, Gabe had an angle where like refs waved off a match or two, and they had the announcers be like, "Oh, this was a questionable call," and I thought this is really building to something, obviously, and it never did. So I don't know if Gabe has a secret vendetta about referees, but it's weird that he lets the ref take the fall here. I don't think it's ever a good idea to make your ref lose esteem in the eyes of the fans, especially when you could have used that as an opportunity for a heel.
I agree, and it especially doesn't make any sense in a company like Ring of Honor where the rules are supposed to be a big deal.
I did really also appreciate the crowd really did enjoy this match, even though there was a lot of technical mat work, and that was something that the Ring of Honor brass was apparently worried about. They were, we'll go into it in a little bit, but they were worried that this crowd wouldn't like matches like that, and I think their fears were proven to be completely unfounded because they more than enjoyed this.
I guess I agree, but I'd say they weren't as hot for it as maybe some of those early Philly crowds would have been. I remember those early Philly crowds were just red hot for everything, and I did notice some quiet moments. They appreciated everything, and this, they certainly didn't boo or shit on or chant boring, but I don't know if I would quite say they were hot for it, if that makes sense.
They never turned on it, though.
Yeah, yes.
And again, at the end, they wanted to see 5 more minutes.
Right.
They chanted bullshit and kill the ref when they didn't get 5 more minutes. So
right. They definitely enjoyed it.
Yeah, they wanted to see this come to an end. But afterwards, we get a Hit Squad promo. Hit Squad cut a short promo outside about tonight's match against the Carnage Crew. The camera pans out a bit, and we see they're standing in front of a bus with 2 broken windows. And Monster Mac points to the window and asks the Carnage Crew if they're ready to make the sacrifice. So I don't know if the sacrifice is to fight a bus, but that's what he was. I don't know. Like, he was pointing to the windows like we were supposed to really, like, yeah, the Hit Squad are badass. They break bus windows. Yeah.
Well, fighting a bus would be quite a sacrifice. Buses are hard to beat. Can't beat a bus. That's my motto. Monster Mac is
too small.
Sorry.
No, you go on. I was done.
Monster Mac is a weird promo. Like, his voice just doesn't match his tough persona. Like, he just has a very, like, kind of lighthearted, silly voice, and he just seems like he's joking around when he's supposed to be tough.
Yeah, Monster Mac comes off as a very
nice guy.
He comes off as jovial and gregarious, and I think he's even done. I think he might have done a podcast with Rob Naylor a long time ago. Like, he's a big Japanese wrestling fan, I think. He comes off as a nice guy, which is, I agree, it kind of works against the Hit Squad vibe, where I think that natural likability comes through with him. He doesn't seem as intimidating when he's also exuding kind of just being a friendly, lovable, lighthearted guy.
It's like he's the Shockmaster, but then he's Uncle Fred.
Uncle Fred in my heart, Shockmaster on your program.
Uh-huh.
My notes. So we get a short promo with the Carnage Crew in Philly's Murphy Rec Center. So I assume this was taped for the last show.
Yeah, at the end of the last show.
Yeah, at the end of the last show, at the end of Crowning of Champions. I assume they taped it for this and then had to cut it for time because there was a lot of cuts on that show. It's them attacking the Ring Crew boys like they usually do before they tell the Hit Squad that the Ring Crew kids represent the Hit Squad. Ooh, and yeah, that's not much to this either.
Nope. But
and
Boston Massacre match.
Then we get the Boston Massacre tag team match. The Hit Squad taking on the Carnage Crew. The Hit Squad beat the Carnage Crew in 11 minutes, 6 seconds when Mafia pins Loke after a burning hammer. Matt, it's safe to say the Boston Massacre match turned out to be a lot like a bunkhouse brawl.
It was a lot like a bunkhouse brawl, and you're going to be very surprised by this, what I'm about to say about this. Because I remember, I heard a lot about the bunkhouse brawl. I hadn't seen it in years, and I maybe didn't think it was as great as some people said. This match I heard pretty much nothing about, and Meltzer said it didn't really get over. But I enjoyed it. I thought it was fine. I thought it was
maybe not as good as the Bunkhouse Brawl, but not noticeably worse. There's a little bit more setup because they did the whole contrived thing where they walked to the back and they brought out these barbed wire boards about 2/3 of the way through the match, and they did all the teases of stuff going into them. But I thought it had the same amount of intensity with the barbed wire. The Hit Squad did some cool moves. I enjoy the Carnage crew in general. I think they do a good job. And, as far as these, like, bloody matches, they're not my thing, but I thought they did a pretty good job with it. There wasn't too much contrived setup in it compared to some other matches that I've seen, maybe from ECW. They did some cool moves onto the boards. I thought the crowd went nuts at the big final, like, spear of DeVito through the board. And then they do the burning hammer from Moff onto Loke at the end. I think maybe it overstayed its welcome, but I thought it was pretty good, which is better than I thought I would say.
We're going to have one of our early big disagreements here because I thought this was below average and significantly worse than the Bunkhouse Brawl.
Yeah, I was looking because I expected it. I was looking for ways that it was worse, and it was a little longer and not as fast paced. But otherwise, I thought it was similar.
I thought the Bunkhouse Brawl went at a good clip, and other than the first couple minutes, which was just of the Bunkhouse Brawl, which was just them grinding on each other in corners and cutting each other, which was kind of boring, I felt that moved at a good clip. I thought that was intense. Maybe, like we discussed on the last episode, maybe too intense for how short the feud had been. I felt there was always something new. There was always a spot. They were always moving to the next big spot, to the next different weapon, to all that. I felt this match was much closer to the kind of hardcore match I've seen a lot of, which is it's a little bit slower and more plodding, and it seems like so much of the match is just a vehicle for the first two rows and the handheld cameras to get good shots of guys bleeding. There's a lot in this match of big close-ups to guys bleeding as the guy just grinds on them and growls, and everything builds to the big two spots at the end where they bring out barbed wire boards, the dastardly Boston barbed wire boards, and do spots into them, and then the burning hammer happens. But I'll make another one of my famous food analogies where I feel like this match was like a pizza where the crust is awful, and you could tell a pizza place just made the crust as a vehicle to get cheese and toppings to your mouth. I felt like this match was just there to get the shots of blood and the barbed wire spots at the end. I mean, they did other spots. There was still one hard chair shot. They brought out the cowbell again. I just felt this was a couple levels below the Bunkhouse Brawl. It just didn't engage me nearly as much. And I just thought it was slower and plotted more and was more just about look at these guys bleed. Even though the last time the match had all four guys bleed. One other thing I did notice about this match, though, I don't know about you, Matt, but this was the first show I noticed that Mafia was starting to lose weight. I don't, maybe I'm just, it's in my head or something, but obviously Mafia would lose a lot of weight, and this is the first show where when he came out, I thought to myself, is he losing weight? Is this the start of it? Because he did look, I think, noticeably skinnier than Mac than he had before.
Oh, I mean, I don't notice things like that. I don't body shame like you do. So I'm
judgmental.
I'm just kidding. But I don't know. It just didn't seem that different. I would say, I know we don't really do star ratings, but like the Bunkhouse Brawl, I would have said was like a 3 1/4, maybe 3-star match for me. And this was maybe like 2 3/4 stars. So I'd say similar in quality, maybe if not quite as good.
See, I would have done like 3 1/4, 3.5, maybe even probably 3 1/4 for like you for the Bunkhouse Brawl. I probably would have done 2 or 1 3/4 for this. I was just not a fan of this. It wasn't. I've seen worse of these kind of matches, but yeah, not. And Dave said the crowd was not into this match. I think they were into the big spots. I think they maybe weren't as into just the minute by minute of the match, but it's not like they turned on this. And I think whenever they did something huge, the crowd gave the appropriate reaction. But I will say, if Ring of Honor thought they needed this kind of match because of the history of this area. They did not react to this like a crowd that was just dying to see gore and stuff. It didn't feel like they absolutely were just desperately waiting for this.
Right, and I would agree with that. And I'd say it's a while before ROH really starts to do really good, like, bloody brawls. They get to a point eventually where they have a lot of good ones, but at this point they're mostly just indie-rific kind of stuff.
And it's obvious now with the second match of this type that a lot of guys on Ring of Honor kind of get pigeonholed into their niche, their thing that they can do for the show. And just like how the Whipwreck students quickly got put into the role of, you do the crazy spot fests that are just without rhyme or reason to get the crowd jumping. Carnage Crew have quickly been slotted in as, you do the big gross brawls and the gimmicks and the weapons and add that element to the shows.
Yep, and that's mostly true for a while.
Mm-hmm. So next we have a very short little match. Biohazard comes out with Michael Shane, and he takes on Don Juan in another TWA Students match. Biohazard wins in 2 minutes, 19 seconds by pinfall after what looked kind of like a halfway point between a back suplex and a backdrop driver.
Third squash of the night.
2 minutes. This felt completely pointless. I know Biohazard and Don Juan probably just came along with Paul London and Rudy Boy and whoever, but you don't get to show anything when you get 2 minutes. It doesn't add any more value to the show. It doesn't give these guys a chance to show the promoters if they're good enough to be booked on future shows. It doesn't put anybody over. Donnie B once again embarrasses himself when he says that Don Juan's really showing something in the match after Don Juan hits a DDT, which might have been the only offensive move Don Juan had in the match, one of maybe one or two. So again, in these short matches, Donnie B always loves to say that the guy losing, oh, he's doing really good, he proves something, when it's obvious he never does. I don't know why this match was on the show. Some of the things on the show felt like the buffet theory of wrestling, where you're not trying to impress with quality, you're just not trying to impress with quantity. Like, look at how many matches we're giving you. Look at how many segments. Look how many different wrestlers are booked on this show for you.
All told, it ends up being 14 matches, 14 official matches, which is insane for an indie show like this, especially when there are a few pretty long ones packed in there. I was thinking about this, like, what is this, WrestleMania 5, where they think they have to do this many matches, like it's some super card? Like, it's literally, it's the first ROH show in Boston, but you know what people are coming for. They're coming for the couple of big, like the top indie stars, and so you have all these other things. It just makes it feel like another indie show. This was nothing, and I felt bad for the guys. At least they got a payday, I guess, but I don't think it ultimately did anything for them.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, not offensive, but just why did it need to be here? And
exactly.
We get another one of those matches immediately following it. So I don't know if he put these two together as kind of a cool down or something, but we get the New England Championship Wrestling Special Attraction match where Alex Arion defeats Maverick Wild via pinfall in 5 minutes, 50 seconds with a roll-up. These two guys were from Sheldon Goldberg's NECW promotion. So they kind of get a little bit of a spotlight match here, but still a relatively short match. I don't know if Sheldon Goldberg helped them get a building in New England. I don't know if this was a favor or something, but another match where I don't know why they put this on.
Right, the guys did really have a chance to show anything anyway.
It was a perfectly average match. Maverick Wild had done a bit of work in WCW dark matches and stuff in the 90s. But he gets to show a little tiny bit of heelness, and he also does this weird move where where Arion's lying down near the corner of near the turnbuckles. Arion runs, jumps over him, hits the turnbuckles with his chest, and falls backwards into a senton on the guy. I thought that was at least memorable, but kind of a weird spot. But completely average. Nothing bad about this match. Nothing memorable. Arion gets the win, and I thought Wild looked a little bit more interesting of the two, and he's the one that unfortunately never gets asked back. Arion would be the guy that gets future bookings off of this.
Yeah, I actually liked Wild's vibe. He kind of gave me like a little bit of a Steve Austin vibe. The way he carried himself. He's obviously a lot smaller, but the way he moved, the way he carried himself, the way he did heel stuff and mannerisms, I actually, it showed me some potential there. But like you said, you never really see him again. But yeah, this match, it just felt like it's like they wrestled 100 times, and this is their most basic version of their routine, and it just felt like a routine in a not a good way.
Yeah. I feel for these guys getting these weird little tryout matches like this that don't have much time, but
it felt very WWE. It's like where they just like give these guys like a basic Raw match where you can't do anything, and it's like, well, that sort of defeats the point of ROH. But maybe like these keen-eyed promoters can really see something from these guys in these super short matches. I don't really buy it.
Some of these matches, it just feels like, I think something that happens in indies a lot, or at least more back then, where you're not even really thinking about the experience for fans. You're just trying to make people happy. Like, oh, Biohazard and Don Juan came along with you? Yeah, we can throw them on the show. We'll give you a couple minutes. Oh, Sheldon, you want to put a couple of your guys on the show? Maybe you helped us out a little bit. Yeah, we can put them on for 5 minutes. And you're not really thinking about how all these tiny segments and little matches are going to come off as how they're going to affect the whole of the show. And I know that's something that indie promoters have struggled with sometimes, where you start a promotion and everyone's like, come on, man, we've been friends for a while. Can't you give me something? And that's probably a reason why in these early shows we get so many matches, so many segments, so many unnecessary people that accompany other people to the ring. There's probably some of that to it, I think.
Yeah, and you know what? You probably can't blame them for that. It's probably just some sort of part of the price of doing the cost of doing business, literally at the time, and maybe that's okay. But they probably could have booked it differently. I'm guessing these two matches came right after an intermission or something, and that's why they booked them there. Because on the DVD, it's just like randomly, like they have all these like competitive matches. Then they just have 2 squash matches with nobodies, totally randomly, and it just doesn't feel right. But
it almost felt like a diva match segment from years ago, where before the final few matches, here's 3 minutes of bra and panties or something. But this was just
they still do stuff like that in WWE, but ROH wasn't really the cool down match sort of promotion.
Yeah,
so that's why it felt weird.
And we are into the final 3 matches though, and the next one is the Natural Born Sinners, Boogaloo and Homicide, taking on James Maritato and Tony Mamaluke, the former FBI. James Maritato would not want to be called that now. And the Sinners win in 12 minutes, 31 seconds when Homicide pins Mamaluke after the cop killer. Matt, what did you think about this?
I kind of liked it. I thought the announcers were a little bit less annoying. It wasn't a dynamic match, but it was the first time that both of these teams really got to show off any sort of anything, like and actually have a real tag team match. They played up Boogaloo's amateur credentials, and they sort of do a lot of that stuff. And they had a little storyline of Mama Luke, preening and gloating, and Maritato wants him to just be straightforward and serious. At one point, Donnie B is lamenting Maritato's time in ROH so far, saying that his career is not really going up or down. It's showing a lot of, quote, stagnicity. So, which is one of my favorites so far. But I say it's solid, solid work. I thought that Homicide, he got worked over for a while, and he kind of messed up the hot tag in the sense that instead of tagging Boogaloo in a dramatic way, he just kind of hits 2 leisurely suplexes and then tags Boogaloo. But Boogaloo does a good job when he tags in. And then Homicide's suddenly going for covers already, but I didn't see a tag, so they didn't really care about that. Do a suplex into a guillotine choke by Mama Luke, but Boogaloo breaks it up with a kick. Mama Luke escapes the cop killer, but Homicide goes for it again and hits it for the win. I didn't think there was really a lot of drama or heat, but I thought it was good. I'd say of all the tag teams in ROH, Natural Born Sinners definitely look like they're probably the best at the moment, but correct me if I'm wrong, but this is Boogaloo's last match in ROH, isn't it?
No, it is. Does he work the next show? I'm not sure, because I know he's booked on Glory by Honor, but we'll get into he does not show up to Glory by Honor. So if he doesn't work the next show, then this will be it.
For some reason, I thought it was his last show, but perhaps I'm wrong. I'm going to look that up right now. I'm going to look that up right now.
Okay. I was going to look it up, but I'll let you. So I thought this was a low end of average match. I thought they take it to the mat early, Boogaloo and Mamaluke, and I was excited for that because Mamaluke loves going to the mat, and Boogaloo is an accomplished mat wrestler as well.
Yeah, Boogaloo is not on the next show, nor is Homicide.
Yeah. Okay, so this is you're right. This is Boogaloo's last match in Ring of Honor then, and this is the last Natural Born Sinners tag too then. But I thought when I saw Boogaloo and Mamaluke take it to the mat, I didn't think it was that good because there's two ways mat work can be interesting to me. It can be really crazy moves and quick and flashy with lots of counters, or it can be very slow, but you really work the holds and do good facial expressions and good selling and try and make a story out of it. And this was neither. This was single leg takedowns and holding on to a limb and slow but not really engaging or interesting. And I think it's telling that when they both tag out and Maritato and Homicide come in, they do something that's a little more faster and flashy and pro wrestling in terms of reversals, and I just found it infinitely more interesting than what they had done, even though on paper I was looking forward to their mat work. The match itself, again, low end of average to me. I felt like that this was just, there wasn't anything that really defined the match. It was them passing time. I think Homicide as face in peril is a bad choice. Not just for the reasons you mentioned where he kind of screwed up the hot tag, but the Natural Born Sinners were built on being the scary team, and Homicide isn't a guy I really feel sympathy for. He comes off as, the scary badass, so seeing him being the face in peril out of these four guys didn't really work for me, and maybe that's an unfair thing. That's me putting my own views into it. But also, Mamaluke and Maritato, they worked a couple miscommunication spots, but one of them was even just a missed chop that might have hit Mamaluke, and that might have even been on accident. I felt like they could have leaned a bit more into those kind of spots because that would have at least given this match some kind of story. I guess it wasn't a bad match, but to me more disappointing because there's a lot of talent in this match. They got a good amount of time, and it just turned out to be adequate.
You're definitely a tougher grader than I am, I would say, across the board.
On some things, because we might be coming to the match where I'm going to gush pretty hard, Matt.
All right. Well, in this one, I guess I didn't feel it was disappointing because I thought compared to everything else they were in, obviously the Natural Born Sinners had the bunkhouse brawl, but none of these guys had a chance to actually show what they could do wrestling wise. And I thought the fact they were able to have a match, for the first time in ROH, like just like an actual wrestling match, made it stand out to me a little bit more than I guess it did to you. So I thought it was pretty decent. But whatever is Homicide going to do now that Boogaloo is gone? I'm pretty worried about him. Pretty worried about what's going to happen to him. Yeah,
his career's over now. I mean, Boogaloo was propping him up. But I will give credit. This is the kind of match that feels like it would have gotten 6 minutes on an earlier show, and I do give them credit. They gave it 12 and a half here, so they gave them every opportunity, to really have a good length match. I also felt like maybe Maritato could have been in the match a bit more because he was in some of my favorite parts. Although I will say Mamaluke had my two favorite spots. He had a really nice big forearm off the top, and he had a stretch muffler Boston Crab combo kind of, which I thought looked good. That in fact low-key does later. Maybe he stole it. No, not really. But next we're going to get to the match where I'll be shocked if you like this as much as me, although I'm sure you probably enjoyed it. But we get finally the Battle of the Briscoes. Mark Briscoe's debut in Ring of Honor in the ring. Mark Briscoe beats Jay Briscoe in 16 minutes, 53 seconds via pinfall after he hits the cutthroat driver, which is kind of a Death Valley driver. A burning hammer with the arm, one of your opponent's arms draped over his own neck. This was a match when we started doing this. I was really looking forward to revisiting, but in some ways a little bit dreading, because I hadn't seen this match in years, and I remembered absolutely loving this match. And revisiting it, I still really love this match. I think this is an amazing match. Mark Briscoe is 17 years old when this match is being wrestled. He's 17. The reason why this match is happening in Massachusetts is because he was not allowed to wrestle in Philly, although CZW did let him wrestle underage for a while before they got caught. So this is why this is Mark's first match in Ring of Honor. And Jay's only 18. They're combined 35, and this match had more story and more subtlety and nuance to it than I would say almost every other match in Ring of Honor so far. And it's from the two youngest guys. And one of the things where that all comes in is not only do they work a limb in this match, but I feel a lot of times in wrestling these days, wrestlers work a limb or sell a limb, and it feels like a complete obligation. Like you can practically hear them think in their head, okay, I gotta sell this so guys on Twitter don't yell at me. I see so many wrestlers now, they sell a limb, and all that means is they do every move they were going to do anyway, and they briefly grab their leg after every move. And so many matches where a guy just picks a limb and just works on it just to say they worked a limb. And on this match, everything flows in the sense of Jay gets busted open a few minutes into this match. And Mark, he works to the cut, which I love. He starts punching the cut. Hello, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, sorry, my thing just freaked out a second. But he works to the cut. He starts punching the cut a lot. He doesn't let off of it. So then what does Jay do? When he gets a chance, he stomps on Mark's punching hands, and then he twists it in a knuckle lock, and then he steps on it again. So Mark throws one more punch, but now it's hurt. So what does he do? He starts dropping knees on Jay's head on the cut. So what does Jay do? He reacts to that. He starts going after the knee. And only then do you get the more typical story of Mark selling the knee. I love just how every move was a reaction to something else. And then at this point, Mark does a really good job of selling the knee. I love this moment where Jay's on the outside, and Mark goes to do a springboard dive to the outside. He jumps on the ropes and then hops immediately back down because his knee is hurt. And I've never seen this before. And I know, reading The Observer, Meltzer was really impressed with this too. The crowd applauds that Mark can't do the move and is selling his leg. Like, they give him a clapping ovation for selling and not being able to do this move. And then Mark, he adjusts. Again, he adjusts. He doesn't do a springboard, but he just hurls himself over the rope so he doesn't have to really jump with his leg. And it's given Jay enough time to move out of the way, and Mark lands right on his knee. And even a little bit later, where Mark does do a couple flying moves, one of them, when he does do the springboard, he grabs his knee and screams in pain as he is doing the springboard, like as he's jumping off the rope, which I thought was just so cool. And so to me, that's one of the reasons I love this match. There's such a good story and so much detail work. But another reason I love the match is they still give you all the big high spots, the fast pace. That's all in there too. It's not just like a quiet, slow-moving, methodical match. They give you the best of everything. And they get plenty of big spots at the end. Jay hits this big, crazy sit-out tombstone. Jay bleeds. They still give you, to me, they gave you everything here. And there's some flaws I can get to maybe after I let you talk a little bit, but I still can't, I defy people to find a match this good from two guys that are combined 35 years old.
Yeah, well, that I definitely agree with. That, for their age, this was amazing. And I haven't seen a lot of their other early stuff, pre-ROH. They seem so much more confident against each other than Jay seemed against anyone else, which is interesting to note. I mean, I guess it makes sense. Jay's a kid.
And it's worth noting they had wrestled each other a few times, at least documented when I did my research. They had wrestled in CZW, and in fact, earlier this month, they had wrestled in NECW to a draw, I think.
Yeah, they had some famous matches, best of the best.
The
from
first best
CZW.
So they did have lots of experience with each other.
Yeah, so that makes sense why they were so confident with each other. And I'm sure all the matches, I'm sure that they had at home. I don't even mean like actual fights. I mean, I'm sure they practiced their matches at home because I'm pretty sure they still live together at this point with their parents. So it makes sense. That said, I thought it was really good. Great, in fact. But I thought that Mark totally outshined Jay here. There were times when Jay seemed a little tentative. Like I said, he was a lot more confident. And there was a moment where I think Mark hit a tombstone and Jay pretty much no-sold it. But Mark's selling was so on point, and his heel mannerisms and his facial expressions, he was just such a standout here. Between the hand stuff, Jay did cool stuff where he would when he started targeting Mark's hand. He would do little things, like he was walking to the corner and he just made sure to step on Mark's hand. But Mark was so, good about selling it, and most guys wouldn't have been. And like you said, all the stuff with the leg, jumping up onto the top rope on one leg, not being able to hit that springboard because of the leg. The only thing that I could really criticize it is that big no sell late in the match by Jay. And it wasn't like an intentional no-sell. It was sort of like he just forgot to sell it and went right to his moves, which is the sort of no-selling that bothers me. But you can't fault them that much for that, especially considering their age. I thought this was awesome, considering that they were, their experience level and everything. And they really did a good job of structuring the match. It felt like, they had an advantage in the sense that they do live together and they do get to talk this through all the time. But the thing that surprised me the most was how much more impressive Mark was than Jay at this point.
I would agree that Mark was the standout in this match. I thought Jay did his part, but Jay was also pretty generous in this match. He gave Mark, I would say, the lion's share of the match. But in terms of carrying the personality and the selling, I mean, Mark completely carried all those elements of the match, and those were the major parts of the match. Like, he's the one doing the emoting. There's a great moment where the part where Jay gets busted open, Mark throws Jay into the barricade, and then he throws him into a ring post and the ring apron, and back into the barricade, and back into another ring post. And while Jay's bleeding, Mark turns to the crowd and he goes, "I told y'all he wasn't shit." And I just thought even stuff like that, where he's a 17-year-old, and so often young indie guys or young wrestlers in general, they don't emote at all because they're so new to wrestling. It's all they can do just to keep the moves in their head. The fact that there's a couple times in this match where, as a 17-year-old, at another point he hops on the turnbuckle after a sequence and kind of just dusts his hands off or whatever. Like, he's emoting, he's healing. He is not the crazy, super charismatic Mark Briscoe we'd come to know, but he's doing a fair bit for a 17-year-old while also carrying so much else in this match. And I think Mark Briscoe is one of the most underrated wrestlers of his generation. I think I prefer him in a lot of ways to Jay. And this is one of his great performances. Even years later, this is an individual performance, I think, that ranks among his best. Again, for all those little things. But you still get the big moves. If I had to nitpick a couple tiny flaws, they do the opening 2 or 3 minutes, they do a bunch of really good quick counters and reversals, and they look really cool, but they also look very choreographed. Like, these are all the ideas we've had from a bunch of matches. It's almost too good. Like
another one, like a much better version of the Arion Wild match, and that this is their routine. Like, they know what they do, and they just do it, blindfolded. And then once they get past that, their basic shtick, they get into the really good stuff.
Yeah, and then it starts feeling a bit more organic. But even I could finish those few minutes because you can kind of sell that as, well, they're brothers. They are going to have sequences where they know everything the other guy's going to do and can reverse it, and everything works so just weaves in and out of each other so quick, so well. The other thing I would say is, like you said, there are a few times in the end where the match borders on guys popping up from big moves a little too quick to go back on offense, and maybe they almost do a little too much, just in the sense of, because Jay's on defense for so much, he takes quite a lot in this match and keeps surviving it. But they did save Mark's finisher for the end. And
And no kick out of the J Driller, but I promise it does happen a lot. We'll get to it eventually.
I'm always watching for it now, going, can like Matt add this to the list?
I have a few matches in mind that we'll get to in a few months that it definitely happens in.
But they did protect the J Driller here, where Jay goes for it, but he's never able to hit it. So they save that for a future. But I just think this is a great match, and I can't believe that this guy is 17. And I remember Dave was really impressed with these guys, too, from this match, because when he got the tape, he said Mark and Jay Briscoe showed just how much those two have improved in the last 6 months. And if they don't physically burn out, they're going to be players. So even Dave was just really impressed with this match.
Although I feel like that's almost underselling. Like, they've improved in the last 6 months and they're going to be players. I would watch this match and say these two are players, like now.
I mean, they are already at the top of the card and blowing away everyone else below them.
Now, it is interesting, though, to like contrast it with everything else they've allowed Jay to do so far in terms of quality. You know, this was like not only better than anything Jay has done so far, but like it's like you might as well be a different human being. The degree of how much better it was.
And he's also playing a completely different role. You know, he's allowing himself to be the face in peril here. Well, it's not a tag match, but he's in that same, you know, every other one of his matches has basically been 50-50 hit moves trying to impress the crowd. And here, Mark's carrying I would say, a lot of the detail work and the story, but Jay's putting Mark in a position where he gets to shine and do all of that. And obviously, I mean, you can see why Jay would be generous knowing that his brother isn't going to wrestle much for Ring of Honor until he turns 18. He'll get to wrestle again when they return to Massachusetts. So I can see Jay going, you know, I want to make sure my brother really gets over here for the first time. And since I get to work here all the time, I should make sure. They built a match where Mark looks absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, even that thought process is very mature for their age.
Mm-hmm. So, great match. Great, in my opinion.
And they wrestle each other a few other times through the years in ROH. And this is still, I think, the best one of their matches that they had together in ROH, like against each other. I think I remember a couple in particular, one that they had in 2007 that I don't think matches this one in terms of the whole package.
And they also wrestle again at the first anniversary show. So
yes. There's
at least, yeah. And I think in a lot of ways the Briscoes improved their charisma. You know, they bulked up, became even better athletes, stuff like that. But in terms of selling and storytelling, I think they might have actually lost a little bit over the years. I think they kind of focused a bit more on the basics, especially Mark, at this early point in their careers. And I really, really liked the little details in this match are what made me fall in love with it. Even though, again, you get big moves. Even Jay was always good in his matches, good for at least a couple big crazy moves that you don't often see. This one, not only did he do the big sit-out tombstone, he did a Death Valley driver, but he held onto the leg and turned it immediately into a cradle. It was almost like a cradle Death Valley driver. I thought that looked excellent too. And Jay's constantly in these early shows pulling out, like, it seems like almost every show he's pulling out some really cool move, and then he just doesn't do it again. It's really interesting. He pulls out the Muscle Buster on the first show. Another one of the shows he does that leg capture stunner. It seems like every show he's just picking out one thing to try, and then that's it. He puts it back on the shelf. Like, I don't need to do that again. And it makes the matches fun.
Youthful experimentation. We all did it.
He experimented with stunners in high school.
Mm-hmm.
Actually did. So yeah, great match. Go out of your way to see it. I really, really enjoy it. Still, it holds up incredibly well because of the little detail stuff. Afterwards, security guard takes first Mark shakes Jay's just beaten dead, and Mark shakes his hand as he's lying on the mat. Security guard has to carry a beaten Jay to the back, and the security guard just like slumps a dead-looking Jay against a door and then leaves him there. I felt like he could have attended to him a bit better.
He's a security guard. He's not a medic. Give him a break.
Mark walks up to him and through the curtain and taunts him, saying, you know, he's 1-0 now, because he used to taunt Jay going, you're 0-1 and 0-2 and all that stuff. So now he's going, I'm 1-0, and So this feud must continue. And that's all that leaves us now for matches is the main event, which is Low-Ki's first and only successful title defense of the Ring of Honor title. And he defeats AJ Styles in a rematch of their Night of Appreciation bout. He beats him in 1949 via pinfall, not P-fall, with a key crusher.
Boy, I'm trying to picture what that would be.
He's not R. Kelly. But, Matt, since I took the last match and just gushed over it to start, what did you think? I'm curious to see how much did you enjoy this match?
I liked it a lot. I thought this was an example of the crowd burnout in the sense that I thought the crowd was into this match, but I was just imagining how into it they would have been if it had taken place maybe like 45 minutes earlier, with fewer matches on the card. But some of the stuff they did at the beginning, like the submission reversal stuff and like Low-Ki, like where he was like lifting Styles off the ground, like with his legs and all kinds of crazy stuff. I felt like that didn't feel dated at all. Like it seemed like that could have happened now. And it would have still seemed new and fresh. So in that sense, these guys were pretty amazing at the time in terms of the athleticism, the stuff they would do on the mat. I do think that doesn't seem too old-fashioned. By the end of the match, with the big moves and stuff, I thought maybe they're like, we've gone a little bit further since then. But I thought it was great. Yeah, I thought they slowed it down from their first match and they told more of a story. You had AJ. First of all, you had them start doing the thing where they traded thigh kicks in the middle of the ring, and then Low-Ki ended it with a kick to the head, and then AJ dodges a kick and hits a hard kick to Low-Ki's head while Ki is on the mat. A lot of the big kick stuff. Styles goes for his Frankensteiner from the ground, like the kip up Frankensteiner, and Ki blocks it and kicks him in the back. I thought that was a really cool spot because I haven't seen too many matches where someone blocks that. Then Styles hits it again a minute later, and this time he actually hits it. Then he hits a big spinning lariat. He goes for a dive onto Low-Ki, but Low-Ki kind of takes him out with a kick while he's on the way through the ropes, which is cool. Then Low-Ki comes back with the Kawada kicks. Styles blocks a jumping springboard kick and hits a suplex and a face drop for 2. Ki blocked the Styles clash, and he hits kind of a like a Rana driver almost, like the sort of thing that Matt Sydal used to do. He gets 2 on that. Ki then he does the Dragon Sleeper and the Tree of Woe, and at this point it felt like they were building to the finish, but actually the finish didn't come for like another 7 or 8 minutes, so I thought that was pretty cool. AJ hits his DDT from over the shoulder, that thing that he did in the first match, which he hasn't really done in years, but that's a pretty crazy move. I actually don't like that he does that in the middle of a match because that always feels like a devastating finish, and he never wins with it. But this time it's a delayed cover, so he gets the 2 count after that. He misses the spiral tap, and Ki kind of came back with the Dragon Sleeper, but Styles sort of fell into the ropes. I almost felt like this is like the match was peaking here, and they maybe should have gone to the finish sooner, but it slows down a bit. They have Styles hit a jumping forearm while Ki is in the Tree of Woe, which was pretty cool. That gets 2. They trade chops on their knees, and Ki ends it with a kick to the head, so there's a lot of those. Ki hits a brainbuster for 2, Phoenix Splash into Styles' knees. Then AJ hits a brainbuster. Styles reverses the Ki Crusher into a small package for 2. Then Ki goes for the Kawada kicks, but Styles comes back with a flurry of punches, which I thought was a really good spot. And he hits Ki hits sort of a power bomb and a jackknife pin combination for 2. Ki blocks the Dragon Sleeper, and then he reverses. AJ blocked the Dragon Sleeper, but Ki eventually reverses into a Ki Crusher, and he gets the pin. I thought it was a lot more dramatic than their first match. But again, the crowd was a little bit exhausted, and I thought maybe it peaked a little too early, and they could have gone to the finish, in a different sequence. But I liked the drama, the execution was good, and like I said, a lot of it felt like it was still state of the art, which is impressive considering that it's literally 15 years later.
Did you enjoy this better than their Night of Appreciation match?
Oh yeah, a lot more.
Yeah, me too. Going into this match, I was wondering, is this going to be better? Because I think we both agreed about that match, the Night of Appreciation one, that it was enjoyable, but it was mostly just throwing out big moves and not much else.
Yeah, this definitely was more than that by a lot.
I felt like this one actually had an identity to it. Now, unfortunately for AJ Styles, I think that identity was low-key beating the living shit out of him, but what I really liked in the first match, and they made the whole match more about this, was a lot of people, when low-key hits people hard, they just kind of accept that and they're like, okay, I'm going to let low-key do his thing and then I'll do my stuff. Where it seems like whenever low-key attacked AJ, it would always spur AJ on to fire back just as hard and really bring out a different side of him, or a side that maybe he doesn't do all the time. And a lot of this match was about this. I noticed, like, low-key busts AJ open in the nose, I think, or the bridge of the nose, maybe hard way. But later we'll see a backstage promo for Low-Key, and when the camera zooms in on his face, Low-Key is all marked up with little bruises around the eye and nose. So AJ gave as good as he got here. And this was just a super, I found, very stiff match. It looked like sometimes with Low-Key, you don't know how much looks stiff and how much is really stiff. Some of the stuff looked like he was hitting the absolute hell out of this guy. And again, AJ would get intense and fire right back. I felt like they let things breathe in this match more than the other one. I felt you could feel their exhaustion. It felt like they were having a war here, where the other match was just more of an exhibition. I felt exhausted with these guys near the end. Maybe, again, that's because they did a lot. But I think the stiffness, it just felt brutal. And I felt also like these are two guys that can do a lot of stuff. And they're both very agile and can fly a lot. And there was a bit of flying, but I felt like they kind of pared down their offense more to the strikes. And
They worked a world title match style.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. That's something I was thinking of, kind of. It felt like a big main event. Like, it felt like they worked a main event rather than just a match that could have been anywhere on the show. And they did maybe a little less flying. Like, again, this match had more of an identity. It was about AJ Styles was going to play more of Low-Key's game, and Low-Key was just a bit better at him. AJ Styles can play that game pretty well, but Low-Key is Low-Key. And the mat work at the start I thought was good for what it was, but I kind of thought it was in some ways the worst part of the match, in the sense of, even though it holds up in terms of it's not outdated, it felt like the kind of arbitrary, we need a few minutes of mat work we're going to pad out the match with this, and it doesn't really play into the rest of the match.
Well, let me make my argument for that. Don't you, like, in actual real life, like, don't you need a few minutes of arbitrary mat work? Like, if you're just starting a match, like, doesn't it make sense for two guys to just kind of, like, try to wrestle before they actually get into, like, what they do best?
It does, but I think sometimes the advantage of wrestling is you don't have to, like, I saw recently Kenny Omega talked about selling and saying that we don't need as much specific selling as some fans seem to think, because in real sports a lot of times our guys are really hurting and they don't show it. But in wrestling, I feel like the advantage is, because it's fake, you can make real, more engaging, obvious stories and not have to do everything realistic. So while it is realistic that guys would need to kind of grapple for a few minutes before they really open up and someone finds, and before the match kind of takes shape where, oh, I see this is going to be my strategy. I feel like because wrestling is a work, the advantage is you don't have to do that. Like, everything can have more of an overt meaning and be a bit more showy and flow into each other. But the mat work on its own was good for what it was. But that's kind of just a pet peeve I have in wrestling in general. It's kind of my philosophy on things. But I thought this match was great. So it didn't... I thought this show ends with two great matches. So it's not like it really hurt my overall opinion of the match. I I did agree that the crowd was a bit burnt out, although they still got up for the big parts of it. And just in my opinion, this is a significantly better match than their first match. And I thought their first match was very good, but this is significantly better. AJ Styles, you are a good trooper for taking the kind of abuse Low Ki was dishing out here. AJ Styles has bled on a lot of these shows so far. He bled accidentally at the three-way on the last show. He bled on purpose against Christopher Daniels at Road to the Title, and now he bleeds accidentally again here. So AJ Styles blood freak, I guess. But
yeah, the 2002 ROH main events matches were like very stiff. Like Low Ki really did work very, very, very stiff. Like uncomfortably stiff.
I was just before the show, I found a clip someone put on YouTube, a clip of AJ from an RF video shoot interview just talking about Low Ki. And one thing he says after the Night of Appreciation match, he learned that he needed to start chopping harder. Like basically he said that Low Ki match kind of let him know that things outside of NWA Wildside would be a lot harder. Like he said in that match, the chops from Low Ki were so hard that sometimes he was putting his arms up to like catch them so he didn't have to take them. And this match feels a lot harder than that.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, that to me that doesn't speak well of Low Ki because they don't have to be that hard.
Yeah. I mean, again, with Low Ki, sometimes they're obviously playing into his persona, but I think the persona he had of being maybe too stiff, there's a legit reason that comes from it.
Oh, yeah.
And some guys like that, but matches like this, there was times where it looked like he was just really beating the hell out of this guy in ways he didn't have to. But again, AJ marked up Low Ki's face, and in the shoot interview, AJ Styles said, he likes Low Ki as a person and as a wrestler, so he obviously did not have a problem with giving it back to him.
Yep.
But anyway, great way to end a show. 2 great matches.
Definitely the best back-to-back match combo so far in ROH by a lot, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, this is the first time we've ever had a show that ends with 2 really, really strong matches like this. And both matches that have at least a little bit of a storyline reason. They've been building the Briscoes match up for months, and even the AJ Low Ki match has the Low Ki AJ first match had kind of a disputed finish. So both matches have a little bit of a reason to be there. They're both great. They both got ample time. The first real great double main event, it felt like, in Ring of Honor history.
Agreed.
And post-match, Low Ki celebrates. We follow him through the curtains, and Xavier's waiting for him. And he references something that happened at Road to the Title, where there was a backstage promo where Xavier asked Low Ki if he won the world title. No, it was at Crowning a Champion, I think. He said, if you win the title, can I have a title shot? And Low Ki said yes. We can't hear half of what Xavier and Low Ki are saying because the audio from the PA system and the announcers is so loud. But we do hear enough to hear that Xavier said, "Are you going to make good on that promise?" Low Ki says yes. We'll wrestle at the next show for the title. We see how marked up Ki's face was.
But of course, Low Ki doesn't just have to say that. He most goes, "A challenge was made, and a challenge is accepted." I am a man of my word. Like this is what he's saying as he's standing in the aisleway after he just had a big match. So it's just like tone it down a little bit, guy.
Yeah, it's goofy. I mean, in some ways I love it because it's Low Ki, but in some ways, yeah, it's sometimes it can make you cringe a little.
Yeah.
So we end with 2 more little segments. We get Michael Shane is up in the bleachers while the Ring of Honor ring crew is taking down the ring after the show. He cuts a promo where he runs down a few things. He calls down Rudy Boy. He talks about how he turned down the Prophecy on the show. He acknowledges that he's still feuding with Spanky. And then he says, how dare you call yourself the showstopper? Whatever. They're still going with that. And then he mentions that Shawn Michaels' blood is running through his veins, which, again, every time he mentions that he's related to Shawn Michaels, I feel bad because that comparison is just unfairly doing him no favors.
Yeah.
It was an average promo otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, it's still better than most of the ROH guys as far as promos go. I will say that. Like, most of these promos are bad.
and Michael Shane's was not bad. It just wasn't great.
Yeah, it was just perfectly fine. Yeah. And it was like the Christopher Daniels promos where he had to get across 3 or 4 different things. And he did. He ran them all down in order. And then we get the end of the show. This is probably one of the weirdest ends to an early Ring of Honor show. Dunn and Marcos do a promo, and they look to be in the same spot that Michael Shane just was. Maybe like a minute afterwards, they just were waiting in line to do a promo. And they say that they tell us that
they say their catchphrase.
They say they're Don and Marcos, the top tag team in Ring of Honor. Then the camera zooms in on the Carnage crew coming in to the ringside area, beating down the ring crew who's dismantling the ring.
No, I think weren't they beating up the actual Hit Squad that time?
Was it?
I think that was the Hit Squad at the end.
It might have been maybe. And then the camera cuts back to Don and Marcos. They say, we are Don and Marcos, the top tag team in Ring of Honor. Camera cuts back to the injured guys. Camera cuts back to Don and Marcos. They pause awkwardly and say, we are Don and Marcos, the top tag team in Ring of Honor. And that's the way the show ends. Like, caught to copyright info, end of show.
Yep, well, they did have to get over that catchphrase, which they will say many, many, many more times over the next few years, so.
So, that brings us to the end of the show.
Weird show, right? Because it was, like, really good in some ways, and also felt kind of endless.
Yeah, it's weird, like, it's a show that felt long, but not like a chore. But it did feel long. It was, there's so much stuff, and I feel like when you throw so many short segments at the wall, you never get bored, but you never get super entertained because nothing gets a chance to be great or horrible.
I thought that middle hour felt kind of like a chore. I don't know.
Maybe because I broke it up into so many pieces, it felt less like a chore. But I think in some ways this was the best show so far because you got that big double main event. I felt like there was a lot of variety on the show because you got your hardcore match, you got your straight technical match with Dragon and Morgan, you got your 2 crazy spot fests to open the show, you got a super stiff main event that really felt like a main event, and you got the Briscoes match that told an actual story. So I felt like there's a lot of variety on the show and 2 great matches at the end worth going out of your way to see, and a couple good matches that weren't great, but, I enjoyed London and Shane, and I enjoyed Morgan and Dragon, and I felt like everything, with maybe the exception of Storm and Red, everything that you wanted to get time on the show got time.
Yeah, I thought probably from like pure wrestling quality, this was the best. It was a good show, a very good show. But there's still something about the pacing that it adds up to less than the sum of its parts. They're going to get that down eventually, and the shows are going to feel more cohesive. But I don't think they're there yet. Maybe the different commentary will make a big difference, because the commentary was pretty bad for a lot of the show. I thought it was okay in the last 3 matches or so, but it's pretty bad for a lot of the show. And I am interested to see how the different commentary team kind of makes the vibe a little bit different.
I would agree. I'm really interested in that. So I think we can both agree it was a good show. It's interesting how times have changed because the Observer got a couple long-time readers from New England who said this was one of the best shows they had ever seen in their lives. I would not go close to that far, but it tells you maybe what the standards for indie wrestling was maybe in the Northeast in 2002. But even Dave complained about, I think that's one of the biggest flaws, obviously, was too many segments. Even Dave, who liked the show, pointed out, he said, I've got a strong belief that as a rule, you'd only want to violate on special occasions, that you shouldn't have more than 8 or 9 matches and a 2.5-hour show, and it's best to err on the side of less, because so many indie shows I've seen have a tired crowd before the headline matches, and green prelim guys get more heat just because of a fresher crowd. So I think that goes right into what you were saying about the main event having a bit of burnout.
But it was so good that it wasn't enough to really make it, to make it that much of a difference. You see ROH cards later in the year and later in the ROH history where burnout is much more of a problem.
Yeah. So I would say again, though, because there's so much stuff that if you just were to get this DVD or tape, if you can get it on eBay or something, if you watch the whole way through, I don't think it's ever going to pain you to watch this show. I mean, I think you felt the middle hours more of a chore than me, but even the stuff that isn't great is usually pretty short, and it's worth going out of your way to see those last two matches. I think they're great.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to the end of this episode. Matt, we are halfway through the first year of Ring of Honor. Seems like only yesterday we started the podcast. We got 6 more shows to get through 2002. And the next show we will be doing is ROH Unscripted, which is a very noteworthy show in ROH history. We'll have a one-night tag tournament to crown the first ever tag champs. We'll have the second ever Ring of Honor singles champion crowned. And most importantly, we'll have the match that really broke Paul London through, the match where fans would want him not to die, the big street fight against Michael Shane. So, and the new announced team.
And I apologize for spoiling the fact that Boogaloo will not be on the show.
Yes, all you Boogaloo fans, skip the next 80 shows.
Skip the rest of Ring of Honor history.
Yeah.
Although Boogaloo might come back, you never know.
Although we will have reason to talk about Boogaloo's departure in 2 episodes, but come back for Unscripted. Again, Place to Be Nation Podcast Network. Keep listening. There are a ton of good shows. Thanks as always to the Cubs fan. And thank you, Matt, for carrying the show. And thanks everyone for listening. Tell a friend, just like it's a Ronco infomercial product. If you like the show, tell a friend.
I will not stop the recording until I say that I did not carry the show. You will not get away with that.
And I got to give the contact info because that's how horrible a host I am. If you want to contact us, ThROH@gmail.com, on Twitter @TrevorDame, and on Twitter @MayorMGF. We're also posting on the Pro Wrestling Only message board, Voices of Wrestling, Figure 4 message board. I'm checking all of them. Thank you guys again so much. Matt carried the show. I'm going to assist on that.
Nope.
Yep. Anything else to say, Matt?
You're the greatest host in the history of hosting.
Okay, well, suck it, Joe Gagney. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. Suck it, Joe Gagney.